Hey guys, just want to say, hope you enjoy these Facebook stories. If you're new here, please smash that subscribe button and don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoy these stories. Now, let us know in the comments what you guys want to hear, and yeah, it'd be great to interact with you guys. Now, let's enjoy the stories.
I knew something was off before the bread even hit the table. It was one of those chain Italian places by the highway, a kind with fake vines on the ceiling and too much perfume in the air. I got there 10 minutes early because I hate rushing into things. I was already nervous enough. Daniel walked in like he owned the place, not in a loud way, just in this quiet, confident way that made the hostess stand a little straighter. He smiled at me like we had been dating for years instead of meeting for the first time. I remember thinking he looked normal. Good normal. Clean sneakers, simple jacket, nothing flashy. He hugged me without asking, but I brushed it off because some people are just like that. We sat down, and before I could even open the menu, he took it out of my hands and said he would order for both of us because he had better taste. I laughed because I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. He didn't even look at me when he told the waiter what I was having. When I said I actually wanted something else, he smiled like I was a kid picking candy for dinner and said I would thank him later. That was the first small thing. Then he started correcting the way I told stories. I was talking about my job at a clothing store in the mall and how my manager always schedules me on weekends. He interrupted and rephrased what I said, like he was editing me in real time. He said it sounded more confident his way. He kept doing it. Every time I tried to explain something, he would adjust my words like he was polishing me. At one point, he asked what kind of music I liked. I said mostly pop and random playlists. He tilted his head and told me that was too vague and that people respect specifics. He started listing artists he thought were better for someone like me. It was subtle, but it felt like he was building a new version of me in his head and testing it out. The food came, and of course, it wasn't what I would have chosen. It was something heavy and covered in sauce. He watched me take the first bite like he was waiting for a reaction. I said it was good, because it was fine, and he looked satisfied in a weird way, like he had passed a test. Halfway through dinner, he started asking questions that didn't feel normal for a first date. He asked how I handle criticism. He asked if I usually let other people take the lead. He asked what my longest relationship was and what went wrong. When I tried to keep it light, he would circle back and say he needed more detail. I noticed he never answered anything about himself directly. Whenever I asked about his last relationship, he gave vague answers about it ending because he outgrew her. He kept saying he values growth and structure. He said most people don't know what they need, and that's why relationships fail. The real moment everything shifted was when the waiter got our order slightly wrong. They brought him the wrong side dish. Before I could even react, he calmly told the waiter it was fine and that he would eat it anyway. Then he turned to me and said most people would complain just to assert themselves. He said it's interesting to see who needs to control small situations. He looked straight at me when he said it. I started noticing how often he used the word control, not aggressively, not in a scary tone, just casually, like it was part of everyday conversation. He said he believes every interaction is a balance of control and that someone always ends up leading. He asked me who I thought was leading at that moment. I didn't answer. He leaned back and smiled, like silence was an answer. After dessert, which he also chose, he finally admitted something that made my stomach drop. He said he likes first dates because they are like controlled environments. He said 2 hours is enough time to see how flexible someone is. He said most women don't even realize they are being guided. I felt heat rush up my neck. He said it so calmly, like he was explaining how to cook pasta. He told me he had been adjusting the evening on purpose, ordering for me, steering the conversation, correcting my phrasing, even choosing the restaurant because it had dim lighting that makes people more agreeable. I asked why he was telling me this. He said because if I hadn't noticed by then, it meant something about me. He said it was impressive that I pushed back on the menu. He said he keeps mental notes. The scariest part was that he didn't seem angry or unstable. He seemed logical, almost proud, like he had built a system and was testing it. When the bill came, he took it immediately and said he would handle it. I reached for my purse, and he gently pushed my hand down and said he already anticipated that reaction. He said letting him pay would reveal something about my comfort with traditional roles. I felt like I was part of the study. Outside the restaurant, the air felt too cold. He walked me to my car and stood a little too close. He said he enjoyed the data from tonight. He used that word. Data. He said he thinks I have potential, but that I would need guidance. I just nodded because I wanted to get in my car and leave. Later that night, he sent me a long message summarizing the date. He listed moments where I complied and moments where I resisted. He said it was promising that I resisted more than average. He said most women don't question him when he orders for them. I read that message 3 times because I couldn't believe it was real. What keeps replaying in my head isn't anything dramatic. It's how normal he looked, how calm he was, how easy it would have been to ignore the small signs. There was no yelling, no threats, just this steady, calculated pressure the entire time. I didn't block him right away. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wanted to see if he would admit it was all a joke. But the next day he sent another message asking if I was ready for a second session. That word. Session. I blocked him after that. No dramatic speech. No big moment. Just blocked and done. Sometimes I still think about that dinner when I go to that side of town. I wonder how many other girls are sitting under those fake vines while Daniel watches them choose between speaking up or letting him decide. I almost canceled because my hair looked flat and my eyeliner would not cooperate, which is embarrassing considering what the actual problem turned out to be. It was supposed to be a simple coffee date on a Saturday afternoon. Nothing fancy. Just this artsy cafe downtown with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus. Tyler picked it, said he went there all the time. I remember standing outside before going in, checking my reflection in the dark window, telling myself to chill out. It was just coffee. People meet for coffee every day. No big deal. Inside it smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon. I spotted him right away because he was already waving at me like we were old friends. He looked exactly like his pictures. Baseball cap, relaxed smile, flannel shirt. He stood up when I walked over and gave me this quick side hug that felt normal. Nothing weird. Nothing intense. Just easy. The first 10 minutes were fine. He asked about where I live, what I was studying, the usual stuff. He seemed attentive in that way that makes you feel interesting. He laughed at the right times. He nodded like he actually cared. I started to relax. I even thought maybe this would be one of those surprisingly good dates you tell your friends about later. Then something strange happened. A girl walked over to our table. She was holding an iced drink and smiling like she knew him. Before I could even process it, Tyler casually introduced her as his girlfriend. Not ex, not friend, girlfriend. And he said it so smoothly that for a second I wondered if I had misunderstood everything. My brain felt like it short-circuited. He did not look embarrassed. He did not look caught. He just looked at me, then at her, then back at me, like he was observing a science experiment. The girl seemed confused too, but she played along awkwardly. I could not tell if she was in on it or just as lost as I was. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe it was a dumb joke, but he kept going. He told her we had just met and that I seemed really cool. He said it like he was introducing a coworker at a party. My stomach dropped because I could feel people at nearby tables glancing over. I asked him what he was doing, and he shrugged like it was obvious. He said he likes to see how people react in uncomfortable situations. He said it tells him everything he needs to know about loyalty and insecurity. He said if I got angry right away, that would mean I was possessive. If I stayed calm, that would mean I was confident. I just stared at him. The girl eventually walked away, clearly uncomfortable, and I sat there trying to piece together what just happened. Tyler leaned forward like he was about to share some genius insight. He told me he runs what he calls loyalty experiments on first dates. He creates fake scenarios to test emotional responses. He said too many people hide who they are, so he forces real reactions. I could not believe he was saying this out loud in the middle of a coffee shop. He went on about how modern dating is full of deception and how he refuses to waste time on someone who cannot handle pressure. He said the girlfriend thing was mild compared to some of his other tests. He mentioned pretending to get a phone call from an ex. He mentioned flirting with a waitress to see if his date would confront him. He talked about it like it was a hobby. The worst part was that he genuinely seemed proud. I asked him if the girl was actually his girlfriend. He said no, just someone he met there before who agreed to help him out sometimes. He said she likes people watching too. That detail made my skin crawl because it meant this was planned. It was rehearsed. I was not just unlucky. I was part of a routine. He sipped his coffee calmly while I tried to process the fact that I had been manipulated within the first 20 minutes of meeting him. I started noticing other things. How he kept checking my face for reactions. How he leaned back when I crossed my arms, like he was measuring my body language. He even pointed out that I had stopped touching my drink. He said it was a sign of emotional withdrawal. I felt like I was trapped in a psychology class I never signed up for. He said he once dated a girl for 3 months without telling her about the experiments. He said she failed multiple tests, but he kept her around because he was curious how far it would go. He said it like he was talking about the lab project. I asked why he thought this was okay. He said honesty is important, which is why he told me about it now. He said most women appreciate transparency. I almost laughed because the irony was unbelievable. The cave suddenly felt too small, too loud. I could hear the milk steamer screeching behind the counter and people typing on laptops. Normal sounds. Normal Saturday afternoon, but everything felt off. He leaned closer and asked how I would rate my own reaction so far. He said I was handling it better than average. He said some girls cry or storm out. He seemed impressed that I was still sitting there. That comment snapped something in me. I realized he was not looking for connection. He was looking for control disguised as curiosity. He wanted to trigger emotions and then judge them. It was like he believed he was smarter than everyone else because he could engineer discomfort. I stood up, not dramatically, just calmly. I told him I did not sign up to be evaluated. He smiled again, like that response was also part of his data. As I grabbed my bag, he said walking away would confirm a pattern he had noticed in women who avoid conflict. He said staying would show resilience. He literally tried to turn my exit into another test. That was the moment I understood that there was no winning with him. I walked out anyway. Outside, the air felt brighter than it had any right to be. Cars were passing, people were laughing on the sidewalk, and everything looked completely normal, which made it worse somehow, because inside that normal-looking cafe was a guy who treated first dates like social experiments. Later that evening, he sent me a message. He thanked me for participating and said my responses were fascinating. He even broke down the timeline of my facial expressions. He said at minute 12 I looked confused but composed. At minute 15 my jaw tightened. At minute 18 I disengaged physically by leaning back. I read that message twice because I could not believe someone would analyze a coffee date like that. He ended it by saying he would be open to a second meeting to explore compatibility further. He used that word explore like we were discussing a research grant. I did not respond. For a few days, I kept thinking about the girl who held him. How many times had she walked over to a table and pretended to be his girlfriend? How many girls had sat there feeling blindsided while he silently graded them? It made me question everything about how people present themselves online. His profile had talked about honesty and deep conversations. Nothing about experiments. Nothing about staged scenarios. I told my friends and they were split. Some thought it was just a weird joke taken too far. Others were furious. One of them said it was manipulative in a subtle way because he created a problem and then blamed the reaction. I keep replaying it in my head sometimes, not because I missed him, obviously, but because it was so calculated. There was no yelling, no dramatic confrontation, just the steady feeling of being observed. The part that sticks with me the most is how normal he looked when I first walked in, how easy it would have been to brush off the girlfriend thing as awkward humor, how close I was to staying just to prove I could handle it. But I do not want to be with someone who turns basic emotions into test results. That Saturday started with bad eyeliner and ended with me blocking a guy who thinks dating is a lab study. Nothing explosive. No big scene. Just a quiet decision made on a sidewalk outside a coffee shop. I found out that Marcus had been tracking me because he said it casually, like he was mentioning the weather. It was our first date, and we were sitting at this rooftop bar above a parking garage downtown. The place was trendy in a fake, effortless way, with string lights hanging across the open ceiling and heaters blasting warm air even though it was barely cold. I almost did not go because I had worked a double shift at the gym that day and my legs were dead. But Marcus seemed normal over text. Funny, consistent, not clingy. That alone felt rare. When I got there, he was already at a high top table near the edge. The city lights were behind him, and he looked put together, button-down shirt, clean haircut, expensive watch that he probably wanted people to notice. I remember thinking he looked like someone who had his life in order. The first half hour was honestly fine. We talked about work, about how annoying traffic is, about how everyone pretends to love hiking on dating apps. He laughed easily. He maintained eye contact without staring. He even asked questions about my job instead of just talking about himself. I felt myself relaxing. Then he asked me if I still ran along the river trail near my apartment. My stomach dropped a little because I had not told him that. I had mentioned that I liked running, but not where. I asked how he knew that, and he shrugged like it was obvious. He said he uses the same fitness app as me and noticed we have overlapping roads. I laughed at first because I thought he meant in a general way, like maybe he runs in the same part of town. But he shook his head and clarified that he had seen my exact routes. He said the app suggests friends nearby, and he recognized my profile picture. I remember feeling confused because my account is private. At least I thought it was. He pulled out his phone and showed me. There I was. My name, my weekly mileage, the map of my runs with little colored lines showing where I had gone. He zoomed in casually and pointed to the stretch of trail behind my building. He said he thought it was cool that we were practically neighbors. I felt my face go warm, but not in a cute way, in a what is happening way. I asked how long he'd been looking at that. He said since we matched 2 weeks ago. He said he wanted to see if I was consistent with what I claimed on my profile. He said a lot of people exaggerate their hobbies. I just stared at him. He kept talking like this was totally reasonable. He said he values honesty, and he likes verifying things early on. He said it saves time. He even laughed and said he almost ran into me on purpose last weekend, but decided it would be more fun to meet organically at the bar instead. That sentence made my chest feel tight. I tried to keep my voice steady and asked why he did not just ask me about it. He said people lie when you've asked directly. He said data does not lie. He tapped his phone when he said it, like the screen was proof of something bigger. I started replaying the past 2 weeks in my head, the random times I felt like someone was behind me on the trail. The white car that drove slowly past my building one night. I had brushed it off because I did not want to assume the worst. He must have noticed my expression shift because he leaned back and said he hoped I was not upset. He said he was just being proactive. He said in his last relationship he found out 6 months in that his girlfriend had been lying about small things and it ruined everything. Now he verifies up front. The word verifies echoed in my head. I asked if he had looked up anything else. He did not hesitate. He said he Googled my name, scrolled through my social media, even found an old 5 race result from 3 years ago. He smiled like he had uncovered hidden treasure. He said it with pride, not guilt. The rooftop suddenly felt too exposed, like anyone could overhear us, like the string lights were spotlighting me. I took a sip of my drink and realized my hand was shaking slightly. I set it down quickly so he would not notice. He told me he also figured out roughly which apartment building I live in based on the start and end points of my runs. He said he did not know the exact unit, obviously, but he had a good guess. He said it in a reassuring tone, as if that made it better. I could hear music playing from the speakers above us, but it sounded distant. My brain was focused on one thing. He had mapped my routines before even meeting me. I asked why he thought that was appropriate for a first date. He said he believes in efficiency. He said modern dating wastes too much time on surface-level questions. He prefers to gather information quietly and then confirm it in person. Gather information quietly. I asked if he had ever told other women he did this. He admitted he usually waits until the 3rd or 4th date because some people overreact. He said he told me early because I seemed mature. That word mature felt like a trap. I started noticing how he watched me carefully after every sentence, like he was assessing whether I would bolt. He even commented that my breathing had changed. He said he studies behavioral psychology in his spare time and finds patterns fascinating. I felt like I was being profiled in real time. He reached for my hand across the table and I pulled it back instinctively. He paused for half a second, then smiled again and said physical distance is a common response to perceived threat. He said it calmly, like he was narrating a documentary. That was when I knew I needed to leave. I told him I was uncomfortable. He tilted his head and asked what specifically made me uncomfortable. He wanted details, metrics, categories. I did not have the energy to break it down for him. I stood up and grabbed my jacket. He He stayed seated and said he was disappointed because he thought we had strong compatibility indicators. He actually used those words. As I walked toward the stairs, he called after me that he would never use the information in a harmful way. He said he just likes to be informed. The elevator ride down felt endless. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a notification from the app or a message from him analyzing my exit. When I got outside, the street felt louder than usual. Sirens in the distance, cars honking, people laughing on the sidewalk. Everything normal. Everything ordinary, but my sense of safety felt cracked. That night, I went into the fitness app and changed every privacy setting I could find. I made my profile invisible. I deleted past routes. I even considered deleting the account entirely. The thought that someone had been quietly mapping where I run made my skin crawl. He texted me an hour later. He said he hoped I got home safe and that he respected my reaction even if he disagreed with it. He said transparency builds trust and that eventually I would appreciate his thoroughness. I did not respond. The next morning, I woke up to another message. He had sent a screenshot of my updated privacy settings. He said he noticed I made changes and that it was an interesting behavioral shift. He asked if it was directly correlated to our conversation. My heart dropped into my stomach. That meant he was still checking. I blocked him immediately after that. For the next week, I avoided the river trail. I ran on a treadmill instead, staring at a blank wall. Every time I passed a window in my building, I wondered if someone outside could see in. I hated that he had taken something simple like a running route and turned it into data points. What bothers me most is how logical he sounded. He never raised his voice. He never threatened anything. He framed everything as caution and intelligence. He believed he was being smart, not invasive. But there is something deeply unsettling about someone who thinks gathering private details without permission is just good planning. I still use fitness apps, but I double-check every setting now. I am hyper-aware of what I post online. Not because I am hiding anything, but because I learned how easily someone can turn small pieces of information into a map of your life. That rooftop bar is still there. People still take pictures under those string lights and post them with cute captions. Sometimes when I drive past it, I think about how normal that night looked from the outside. Just two people having drinks with a city view. No one would have guessed one of them already knew exactly where the other one ran every Tuesday and Thursday.
Hey guys, really sorry to disturb you, but if you're enjoying the stories up until this point, please smash that like button. That's all I'm asking for you guys. Let's break some records this year. Now back to the stories.
I knew something was wrong when he kept adjusting his phone every few minutes like it was part of the date. We met at this low-lit cocktail bar downtown that tried really hard to look mysterious. Dark walls, tiny candles on every table, music just loud enough to blur conversations. It felt like the kind of place people pick when they want a first date to feel important. Ethan had chosen it and said he liked the atmosphere for real conversations. That should have been my first clue. He was already sitting in the corner booth when I got there, phone face down on the table, jacket folded neatly beside him. He stood up, smiled wide, and gave me a hug that lasted half a second too long. Nothing dramatic, just slightly off. The first 20 minutes were normal enough. He asked about my job, my classes, what I did on weekends. He listened closely, nodding like every word mattered. But I noticed his phone sitting right near the edge of the table, angled slightly toward us. Every few minutes he would casually rotate it or tap the screen. At first I assumed he was checking notifications. Everyone does that. But he never looked down long enough to actually read anything. It was more like he was positioning it. When our drinks arrived, he asked if I was comfortable with deep conversations on first dates. I laughed and said sure, depending on what that meant. He said he hates surface-level talk and prefers to get straight into how people think. I thought that was intense, but not necessarily bad. He started asking oddly specific questions about my views on loyalty, trust, social media, privacy. It felt less like flirting and more like a survey. Every time I answered, he leaned back slightly and adjusted his phone again. Halfway through my second drink, he smiled in this satisfied way and said he had a confession. He said he likes to document his dating life. I assumed he meant journaling or something harmless, but he clarified. He said he runs a small private podcast where he discusses modern dating behavior. He said it is anonymous educational, and insightful. Then he casually added that he records his first dates to capture authentic reactions. I felt my brain pause for a second. I asked if he was joking. He shook his head. Calmly, confidently. He turned his phone slightly and said it had been recording audio since I sat down. He said he likes to analyze tone shifts, hesitation patterns, emotional reactions. He said it helps him understand people better and create engaging content. I stared at the phone like it had just grown teeth. He said he does not use real names and edits out identifying details. He said his listeners appreciate how raw and honest the conversations feel. He even said some women feel honored to be featured once they understand the bigger picture. Honored. I asked how many dates he had recorded. He said over 30. He said some turned into multiple episodes if the conversation was layered enough. He talked about it like he was building a brand. Like this was ambition, not invasion. The candlelight suddenly felt harsh instead of romantic. I became hyper-aware of every word I had already said, every joke, every personal detail. He noticed my expression change and quickly added that he would ask for my consent before publishing anything. He said recording first allows him to capture authenticity before people start performing. That logic made no sense. I asked why he did not tell me beforehand. He said because if he announced it upfront, the entire dynamic would shift and he would not get genuine behavior. He said he values real reactions. He said most people curate themselves too much. I could not believe he was framing this as a public service. He leaned forward and said I was actually doing really well so far. He said my tone had stayed steady even after he revealed the recording. He said that shows emotional control. He was analyzing me in real time while still recording. I felt exposed in a way that was hard to describe. Not physically unsafe, just stripped of privacy. Like my words were no longer mine. I asked if he planned to use this exact conversation. He said it had potential. He mentioned that the moment of disclosure itself makes compelling content. That sentence made my stomach twist. I told him to stop the recording immediately. He hesitated for half a second, then tapped his screen. He said it was off, but I had no proof. He could have easily lied. That thought alone made it worse. He tried to calm the situation by explaining his mission. He said dating culture is broken and people need transparency. He said his podcast helps others avoid red flags by studying real interactions. He said he removes identifying information so no one is harmed. He genuinely believed he was ethical. I asked if any woman had ever objected strongly. He admitted a few had walked out. He described one girl who cried and another who threatened to report him. He said they were overly dramatic and misunderstood his purpose. That was the moment something shifted inside me. He did not see people. He saw case studies. I looked around the bar and realized how many couples were sitting in dim booths having private conversations, trusting that their words stayed between them. Meanwhile, I was part of someone's content strategy. He had chosen the corner booth intentionally. Better acoustics. Fewer interruptions. He even admitted that once, like it was clever planning. I told him this was invasive. He countered by saying podcasts record conversations all the time. I pointed out that those conversations involve consent from the start. He argued that consent after disclosure still counts. He said legally he was fine because of local recording laws. The fact that he had researched the laws made it worse. He then offered to play back part of the recording so I could hear how I sounded. Like that would comfort me. Like hearing my own voice analyzed would somehow make it better. I refused. The entire energy of the night had shifted. The candles felt fake. The music felt intrusive. Even my drink tasted different. I felt foolish for relaxing earlier, for speaking openly. He had not been connecting. He had been collecting. I stood up and grabbed my bag. He looked disappointed but not embarrassed. He said this reaction itself was fascinating and wished he had kept the recording going. He actually said that, like my discomfort was a missed opportunity. I told him to delete everything. He said he would consider it if I confirmed I did not want to be featured. The wording made it clear he still saw this as a collaboration, not a violation. I walked out without finishing my drink. Outside, the night air felt sharp and loud. Cars passing, people laughing on the sidewalk, normal Friday chaos, but my chest felt tight. I replayed every moment from the night, wondering what parts he found interesting enough to highlight. Later that night, he sent a message thanking me for participating. He said he had stopped the recording when I asked, but wanted to discuss the possibility of turning the disclosure segment into an educational clip. He promised to distort my voice if needed. I did not reply. The next morning, he sent a link to his podcast platform. He said I could listen to previous episodes to understand his vision. I clicked it out of curiosity, and regret immediately followed. Episode titles like First Date Breakdown and Decoding Hesitation Patterns. Anonymous female voices laughing nervously, answering personal questions, unaware they were part of something bigger at the time. It made my skin crawl. I blocked him after that. What bothers me most is not that he recorded me. It is that he believed it was intellectual, justified, progressive. He genuinely thought he was contributing something meaningful. There was no guilt in his tone, no secrecy, just confidence. Sometimes I think about how many people are out there sharing personal stories under soft lighting, assuming privacy, not realizing someone across the table might be building content from it. That night started as a simple drink at a movie bar and ended with me checking every table for hidden phones the next time I went out. I found out on a random Tuesday night in his car, parked outside my building, engine still running, headlights pointed at the brick wall across the street. There was no dramatic music, no sudden reveal, just a calm voice explaining something that completely rearranged how I saw the past 3 months. But to understand why it hit so hard, it starts earlier at my aunt's backyard barbecue at the beginning of summer. It was loud and chaotic, kids running through sprinklers, uncles arguing about sports, paper plates bending under too much food. My sister had brought a guy she was casually seeing. That was Brandon. He blended in instantly. He shook my dad's hand firmly, laughed at my uncle's dry humor, offered to help carry coolers. I remember noticing how observant he was. Not loud, not flashy, just watching everything carefully. At one point, I caught him looking at me across the yard, but I brushed it off because I assumed he was just scanning the crowd. He stood next to my sister, but they did not seem close. No hand-holding. No inside jokes. It felt temporary. By the end of the night, I barely thought about him. A month later, my sister mentioned they stopped seeing each other. She shrugged like it was nothing. Said he was nice, but there was no spark. That was it. No fight. No tears. She moved on fast like she always did. I honestly forgot about him until his face popped up on my dating app weeks later. At first, I did not recognize him because his photos were different. Better angles. Cleaner haircut. More polished. When it clicked, I stared at my phone longer than I should have. It felt weird but not wrong. They had barely dated. It was short. Casual. I told myself it was not betrayal if there was nothing serious there. Curiosity won, and I swiped right. We matched almost instantly. He messaged like we were strangers. No mention of the barbecue. No mention of my sister. Just normal small talk. Part of me waited for him to bring it up, but he never did. I convinced myself maybe he genuinely did not remember me from that crowded day. Our first date was at a bowling alley that had been renovated to look trendy, neon lights everywhere and loud music echoing off the walls. It felt safe and low pressure. He greeted me with a relaxed smile and a hug that felt natural. No awkwardness. No tension. We played 2 games, and he asked the usual questions about where I live, what I studied, what I wanted long-term. He listened closely. Almost too closely. Halfway through the second game, he said I looked familiar but could not place it. He laughed it off like coincidence. I did not push. After bowling, we grabbed milkshakes at the diner next door. He paid without making a big deal about it. He walked me to my car and asked if he could see me again. It felt easy. Simple. I said yes without overthinking it. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other regularly. Late night drives. Movie nights at his place. Cheap taco spot near campus where the tables wobble. He texted good morning almost every day. He was consistent without being overwhelming. My friends met him and said he seemed grounded. The only small thing that tugged at me was how often he asked about my family. Especially my sister. He asked what she was like growing up, what she struggled with, what made her insecure. At first, I assumed it was just curiosity about my background, but sometimes his questions felt oddly specific, like he was filling in gaps instead of learning fresh information. I noticed he never spoke negatively about her. He described their short relationship as casual and mutual. Clean ending, nothing messy. About a month in, we went to another family gathering. Smaller this time, just immediate relatives. I warned him it might be awkward since he had technically dated my sister, but he said it would be fine. When we arrived, my sister looked surprised, but not upset. She barely reacted. That should have reassured me. But instead, I noticed how Brandon positioned himself. He was polite, careful, observant. He watched interactions quietly. At one point, I caught him studying me while I talked to my cousin, the same way I remembered him doing at the barbecue months ago. It was subtle, but it stuck in my mind. Later that night, when we left, he seemed almost satisfied, like something had aligned. The confession came 2 weeks later in his car outside my building. The streetlights flickered and everything felt calm. He said he needed to tell me something before things got serious. My stomach tightened because that sentence never leads to something small. He took a breath and said when he first met my sister at the barbecue, he noticed me immediately. He said I stood out more to him than she did. He said he tried to ignore it because it would have been inappropriate, but he kept thinking about me afterward. I felt my brain lag behind his words. Then he said when my sister showed interest in him, he did not shut it down because he thought it might be a way to stay connected to my family long enough to figure out if I was single. I remember staring at him in the dim car light, waiting for him to clarify that it was a joke. He did not. He continued calmly, explaining that he knew after the second date with my sister that she was not who he wanted, but he went on a third date anyway because he hoped I would show up somewhere again. He said he did not see it as using her. He saw it as keeping options open. He smiled slightly while saying it, like it was strategic but harmless. My chest felt tight. I asked if my sister knew any of this. He said no and that there was no reason to tell her because it would only hurt her unnecessarily. I asked him if he understood how manipulative that sounded. He frowned like he genuinely did not see it that way. He said he never lied to her. He never promised exclusivity. He just did not disclose that his interest had shifted toward me early on. He described it as following what felt right. He said when we matched later on the app, he saw it as confirmation that everything had worked out the way it was meant to. That word meant made my stomach twist. It did not feel like fate. It felt like planning. The more he talked, the more details slipped out. He admitted he sometimes asked about my schedule indirectly through my sister when they were still dating. Casual questions about where I worked or what days I was usually home. He framed it as curiosity. I heard calculation. He said he never intended to hurt anyone. He just believed in going after what he really wanted. I kept thinking about those weeks when my sister thought she was casually dating a decent guy, not realizing she was part of his path toward someone else. I felt torn between anger and disbelief. On one hand, he had technically ended things with her before pursuing me seriously. On the other hand, his entire presence in our lives had started with me as a goal. It made every memory from that barbecue feel different. The way he observed quietly, the way he asked about me indirectly. It was not random. It was targeted. He reached for my hand in the car and said he was telling me because he wanted honesty moving forward. That was when I pulled away. Honesty after months of quiet strategy did not feel oppressive. I stepped out of the car without yelling, without drama. I just said I needed space. He looked confused more than anything, like he expected gratitude for his transparency. Inside my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed replaying every detail. The family gatherings, the bowling alley, the questions about my sister. It all connected in a way I did not like. I kept imagining how it would feel if roles were reversed. If someone dated me just to get closer to my sister. It felt wrong in a way that was hard to explain without sounding dramatic. He texted later that night, saying he hoped I understood his intentions were genuine. I did not respond. The next day, my sister asked casually how things were going with him. I stared at my phone for a long time before typing back something vague. I have not told her the full truth yet. I do not know if I will. What I do know is that the guy who seemed steady and intentional was intentional in a way I never expected. Not romantic. Not accidental. Calculated from the very beginning. The first red flag should have been the spreadsheet joke, but I laughed because I thought he was kidding. We met this small ramen place near campus that everyone says is authentic because the menus are slightly sticky and the tables are too close together. Caleb suggested it and said he liked places that were cost-efficient but quality-controlled. I did not even know what that meant at the time. He showed up exactly on time, not a minute early, not a minute late. Crisp button-down shirt, clean sneakers, hair perfectly styled like he had measured it. He shook my hand instead of hugging me, which felt formal but not terrible. I remember thinking he seemed organized, structured, maybe a little intense, but not alarming. We ordered at the counter and sat down with our bowls. At first, conversation felt normal. He asked about my major, what kind of job I wanted after graduation, whether I planned to stay in the same city long term. But the questions had this undertone, like he was building a profile instead of getting to know me. When I told him I worked part-time in a clothing store, he asked how much I made per hour. I laughed because I assumed he was joking again. He was not. He said financial transparency is important early on. He shared his salary without hesitation and then asked if I had savings. I felt my shoulders tense but answered vaguely. It was a first date. Why were we discussing numbers like this? Halfway through the meal, he pulled out his phone and opened what looked like a notes app. He said he liked tracking impressions after first meeting so he could reflect later. I thought that was odd but tried to brush it off. Then he started talking about relationships like they were long-term investments. He said emotional compatibility is important, but financial alignment determines sustainability. He used phrases like return value and resource allocation. I stared at my ramen while he explained how dating without financial foresight leads to instability. It felt less like a conversation and more like a seminar I did not sign up for. When we finished eating, we went up to pay. The total was $42. Before I could even reach for my wallet, he said we would split it exactly $21 each. That part was fine. I have no issue splitting a bill. But then he opened his calculator and adjusted it to include tax down to the cent. He even calculated what percentage tip would reflect equal contribution. It was precise in a way that made the cashier look uncomfortable. I handed over my card just to get it over with. I thought that would be the end of it. It was not. As we walked outside, he casually mentioned that since he had driven to meet me and used about a quarter tank of gas, he estimated his travel cost at around $8. He said he believed fairness should extend beyond the restaurant bill. He suggested I send him $4 later to cover half the fuel. I honestly thought he was joking again. He was not smiling. He explained that small imbalances accumulate over time and can create resentment. He said addressing them immediately prevents future conflict. I stood there on the sidewalk trying to process whether he was serious about invoicing me for gas. We decided to grab coffee afterward, and I almost declined, but curiosity kept me there. I wanted to understand how his brain worked. At the cafe, he ordered the cheapest drink on the menu and pointed it out proudly. He said lifestyle inflation ruins people. Then he asked what I expected from a partner financially. I said stability and ambition. He nodded but asked for specifics. Income range, savings goals, debt tolerance. He said before entering a serious relationship, he likes to project 5-year outcomes based on current earning potential. My stomach tightened because it felt like he was evaluating whether I was a profitable choice. He leaned forward and said he sees dating as a partnership agreement. He believes both parties should contribute equally in measurable ways, not just emotionally, but financially and logistically. He said too many relationships fail because one person becomes a liability. That word stuck with me. Liability. I asked if he saw people as numbers. He said not numbers, but assets with varying growth potential. He said it calmly, confidently, like it was rational. I suddenly felt reduced to a column in his mental spreadsheet. Then he brought up children. On a first date, he asked if I wanted them and how soon. When I said maybe someday but not for years, he asked how maternity leave would affect household income projections. I almost laughed from disbelief. He continued explaining that he does not date casually. Every interaction is an evaluation for long-term feasibility. He said emotions are unreliable, but financial patterns are predictive. I realized he was not trying to impress me. He was assessing risk. When the check for coffee came, it was $11. He calculated $5.50 each without hesitation. Then he added that because I had suggested the cafe and it was slightly out of his way, perhaps I could absorb an additional dollar to offset inconvenience. That was the moment something shifted from strange to absurd. I felt embarrassed sitting there while he calmly justified a $1 adjustment like it was corporate policy. I paid my half and the extra dollar just to end it. Outside, he said he enjoyed the evening and believed we had promising compatibility. He said my earning trajectory showed moderate potential but would require strategic planning. He actually said that. I asked what that meant. He said with guidance and disciplined budgeting, I could reach a higher tier of partnership value. The way he spoke made it sound like he was offering mentorship instead of a second date. I realized he was not looking for a connection. He was looking for a balanced ledger. Later that night, he sent me a breakdown of our expenses from the date. Food $21, coffee $6.50, including the extra dollar adjustment. Estimated shared fuel cost $4. He ended the message with a smile emoji and said he appreciates transparent financial beginnings. I stared at my phone in disbelief. It was not about the money. It was about how he framed every moment as a transaction. There was no room for generosity, no room for spontaneity, just calculations. I never sent the $4 for gas. I never replied at all. The next day, he followed up asking if I had reconsidered the investment opportunity of exploring something long-term. Investment opportunity. That was how he described a relationship. I blocked him after that. Sometimes I still think about how calm and logical he sounded, like he truly believed romance should be audited. The raiment was decent. The night was not dramatic. No yelling, no scene. Just a guy who saw dating as a business merger and me realizing I never want to be someone's projected return. The rain that night was the kind that makes the whole city look washed out and reflective, like everything is slightly distorted. I almost canceled. I had just finished a long shift and my brain felt fried, but Noah had been consistent over text for 2 weeks. Not overly charming, not dry, just steady. He picked a small upscale restaurant on the edge of downtown, one of those places with exposed brick walls, dim hanging lights, and carefully arranged plants that look like no one is actually supposed to touch them. It felt grown up. When I walked in, he was already seated in a corner booth, posture straight, jacket folded neatly beside him. He stood immediately when he saw me and pulled my chair out. The gesture was polite, almost rehearsed. I remember thinking he seemed serious in a way most guys my age are not. The first part of dinner felt surprisingly easy. He asked about my day and listened without interrupting. When I talked about my job at the marketing agency, he leaned forward with genuine focus. I explained how I started as an assistant and worked my way into handling my own client accounts. I told him I liked the pace, even the stress sometimes, because it made me feel capable. He nodded slowly, asking questions about growth opportunities and leadership roles. It felt refreshing to have someone actually care about what I did instead of just saying that is cool and moving on. For a moment, I thought maybe this was going to be one of those rare normal dates. Then something shifted. He asked how many hours a week I worked. I told him usually around 45, sometimes 50 during big campaigns. He paused slightly before responding. He said that was a lot for someone who eventually wants a stable long-term relationship. I laughed lightly, thinking he was joking. He was not. He calmly explained that intense careers often interfere with emotional availability. He said it in a neutral tone, not judgmental, but firm. I brushed it off and said plenty of couples manage demanding jobs. He nodded but did not look convinced. When our food arrived, he began talking about modern work culture. He said society has convinced people that professional success equals fulfillment, but in reality, it often replaces meaningful connection. He explained that he believes men and women function best when roles are clearly defined. At first, I thought he was just sharing a traditional opinion, but the more he spoke, the clearer it became that he was describing a blueprint. In his version, the man provides financial stability, and the woman maintains the emotional and domestic environment. He did not say it aggressively. He said it like it was common sense. I told him I valued independence and liked earning my own income. He smiled gently and said independence is often confused with security. He claimed real security comes from unified structure. He said if a man can provide fully, there is no logical reason for his partner to exhaust herself in a corporate setting. The way he framed it almost sounded generous, like he was offering freedom instead of restriction, but something about it felt suffocating. I worked hard for my position. It was not just a paycheck. It was proof that I could build something myself. As the conversation deepened, he asked if I saw myself working after marriage. I hesitated, not because I had never thought about it, but because I did not expect to justify it on a first date. I said I imagined balancing both. He asked how that balance would function practically. Who would prioritize home responsibilities? Who would step back if children entered the picture? His questions were specific, strategic. It felt less like curiosity and more like evaluation. He mentioned his last relationship ended because his ex refused to leave her job. He described her as ambitious but misaligned with his long-term vision. He said he had been clear from the beginning about wanting a traditional structure, and she assumed he would eventually compromise. He did not sound angry. He sounded disappointed, like she had misunderstood a contract. That word kept echoing in my mind. Contract. He was describing love like an agreement with predefined clauses. I asked him directly if he expected his future partner to quit working entirely. He responded that expectation is a wrong word. He prefers alignment. He said if he is committing to providing everything financially, it makes sense for his partner to commit to maintaining the home environment fully. He spoke calmly, confidently, like this was rational teamwork. But every example he gave involved the woman adjusting. He never mentioned stepping back from his own career. When dessert menus came out, he leaned in slightly and said I had qualities he admired. He said I seemed nurturing, organized, capable. Traits that would translate well into building a stable household. The compliment felt hollow. It was like he had already placed me into a role I did not audition for. I asked what if I did not want that exact structure. He paused, then said incompatibility would simply mean we are not suited long-term. His tone was steady, but there was finality in it. The bill arrived, and he insisted on paying. At first I appreciated it, but then he added that he prefers covering expenses because it reinforces leadership in a relationship. That word landed heavily. Leadership. It revealed the hierarchy he envisioned. I thanked him politely, but internally I was pulling away. The dinner had transformed from pleasant to strategic without raising his voice once. Outside, the rain had slowed to a soft drizzle. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement. He walked me to my car and said he felt strong potential between us if I was open to reevaluating my long-term priorities. He said ambition is admirable, but misplaced when it competes with stability. Competes. I realized he saw my career as competition, not something that coexists, something that challenges his structure. Later that night, he sent a long message summarizing the evening. He said he values transparency early on and believes difficult conversations prevent wasted time. He encouraged me to reflect on whether my job truly fulfilled me or if it was just habit reinforced by societal pressure. I read it twice. It was not hostile. It was not cruel. It was calmly persuasive. That almost made it worse. The next day he followed up, asking if I had reconsidered his perspective. He said he could offer stability, protection, and long-term security if I was willing to trust his vision. I stared at the message for a long time. It was not that he yelled or insulted me. It was that within 2 hours of meeting me, he had already tried to restructure my entire future. I did not respond. I blocked him quietly. The restaurant still exists, candles flickering under brick walls, while other couples talk about harmless things. But for me, that place will always be where someone calmly suggested love meant stepping aside from my own life. I thought the weirdest part of the night would be the movie choice. That was before his mother slid into the seat next to him with a bucket of popcorn and smiled at me like she had been invited all along. Justin and I had been talking for about 3 weeks before we finally set up a date. He seemed sweet in a low-key way. Not overly confident, not pushy, just consistent. He suggested we see a late showing of a new action movie at the theater near the mall. It felt safe and simple. I remember getting ready in my bedroom thinking this was the easiest kind of first date. Sit in the dark, make small talk, see if there is chemistry. No pressure to fill every second with conversation. I even texted my friend that it was probably going to be boring in a normal way. I had no idea how wrong that would be. When I got to the theater lobby, he was already there standing near the ticket counter. He looked nice. Clean hoodie, relaxed smile. He hugged me quickly and said he was glad I made it. Everything felt normal for the first few minutes. We bought tickets, and he insisted on paying. Then he said he needed to grab snacks because he gets hungry during long movies. I followed him to the concession stand. He ordered a large popcorn, 2 drinks, and candy. I assumed it was for us. While we were waiting, I noticed an older woman standing a few feet away looking directly at him. She had the same eyes as him. Same smile. I figured maybe it was a coincidence until she walked over and touched his arm. He greeted her casually like this was expected. Then he turned to me and introduced her as his mom. My brain stalled for a second because I was trying to process why his mother was at a late movie on a Friday night at the exact same time as our date. I laughed awkwardly, thinking maybe she was just there coincidentally. But she did not walk away. She stayed. Justin handed her one of the drinks and the popcorn like it had always been part of the plan. He said he hoped I did not mind that she decided to join because she also wanted to see the movie. Decided to join. As if she had simply tagged along on a group outing. I stood there smiling politely while my stomach tightened. We walked into the theater together, all three of us. He had already picked the seats. 3 in a row right in the middle. I ended up sitting on his left while his mom sat on his right. It felt like I had accidentally joined a family night instead of a first date. The lights dimmed and the movie started, but I could not focus. Every few minutes his mom would lean across him to whisper something to me about the actors or the plot. She asked if I liked action films. She asked what other genres I preferred. Her tone was friendly, but it felt like an evaluation. About halfway through the movie, Justin casually put his arm on the back of my seat, but not around me. It was like he was aware of her presence and adjusting his behavior accordingly. I felt hyper-aware of every movement, every reaction. When a loud scene played, his mom grabbed his arm instinctively. He smiled at her reassuringly. I sat there feeling like an outsider watching their dynamic instead of participating in my own date. When the movie ended, I assumed that would be the end of it. But his mom suggested we all grab a late dinner at a diner nearby. Before I could answer, Justin agreed enthusiastically. I felt trapped between politeness and disbelief. Saying no would feel rude. Saying yes meant continuing this bizarre trio situation. I nodded and followed them out of the theater. At the diner, his mom slid into the booth across from us, directly facing me. She ordered for Justin without asking what he wanted. She told the waitress he prefers the turkey club with no mayo. He did not correct her. He just smiled. Then she turned her attention fully to me. She asked about where I lived, what my parents did, whether I had siblings. The questions felt less like small talk and more like background checks. She asked about my health history, casually slipping in questions about allergies and family medical conditions. I could feel my cheeks heating up from discomfort. Justin barely spoke during most of it. He seemed relaxed, almost proud. At one point, his mom said she likes to meet the girls he dates early because it saves time. Staves time. She explained that compatibility is not just between two people, but between families. She laughed lightly, but her eyes stayed fixed on me. I felt like I was in an interview for a position I never applied for. When the check came, Justin paid again. His mom thanked him sweetly and patted his hand. She told me he has always been generous and responsible. Then she added that he still lives at home to save money and that she helps manage his schedule to keep him organized. That was when it clicked fully. This was not a one-time surprise. This was their system. She was part of his dating process. Outside the diner, she hugged him tightly and told him to text her when he got home. Then she hugged me too, longer than expected, and whispered that she hopes I am serious about him because he does not like his time wasted. I stood there frozen while she walked to her car. Justin acted like nothing unusual had happened. He asked if I had fun. Fun. I told him honestly that I was surprised. He looked confused and said he mentioned that he is close with his mom. I said being close and bringing her to a first date are not the same thing. He shrugged and said he values transparency. He does not want to build something with someone who cannot integrate into his family dynamic immediately. Immediately, on the first night. He walked me to my car and tried to hold my hand. I pulled away gently and said I needed to think about everything. He nodded like that was reasonable. Later that night, he sent me a message saying his mom thought I seemed polite and well-spoken. That detail made something inside me snap. I was not interested in being approved by a committee. I never replied. The next day, he followed up asking if I wanted to come over for dinner at his house so his mom could cook properly this time. That was when I blocked him. No dramatic speech. No argument. Just silence. Sometimes I think about how calm he seemed the entire night, like bringing his mother on a first date was completely standard. Maybe in his world it was, but in mine, that theater will always be the place where I realized I was not dating one person. I was auditioning for two. I found out I had been talking to the same guy under 3 different names while sitting across from him 30 floors above the city, And the worst part is I almost admired the effort before I understood what it meant. It started on a random Sunday night when I was half paying attention to my phone and half watching some background show I was not really reading. I matched with a guy named Ryan. His profile was simple. Clean photos. One of him hiking. One of him sitting in a coffee shop. Bio said he worked in tech, liked early mornings, and preferred quiet weekends over parties. He seemed stable in a way that felt calming. Our messages were thoughtful. He asked about where I lived, what kind of music I liked, whether I preferred cities or small towns. Nothing flashy. He responded consistently, but not obsessively. After about a week, the conversation slowed. Not in a dramatic way, just shorter replies. Longer gaps. Then it faded completely. I shrugged it off as normal dating app drift. About 10 days later, I matched with someone named Marcus. Different vibe entirely. Slightly sharper photos. More confident posture. Bio mentioned entrepreneurship and investing. His messages were more playful, slightly teasing. He asked bigger questions about ambition and risk. I remember thinking he felt strangely familiar, but I could not place why. Maybe the rhythm of his sentences. Maybe the way he used punctuation. But online everyone blends together after a while. We talked for over a week. He was more intense than Ryan had been. Faster replies. Longer paragraphs. Then again the conversation abruptly slowed. He stopped responding mid-topic. I assumed he met someone else. That was that. A week after that, I matched with Daniel. Third guy. Different haircut in his photos. Casual vibe. Bio focused on road trips, vinyl records, and spontaneous travel. His tone was relaxed and funny. He did not ask heavy questions. He sent voice notes sometimes. He felt more natural than the other two. Less curated. We talked for nearly 2 weeks before he suggested meeting in person at a rooftop bar downtown. I agreed because out of the 3 recent matches, he felt the most real. I did not connect the dots. When I got to the rooftop bar, the city lights stretched out in every direction. It was one of those places where drinks cost $18 each, and everyone pretends they are not checking who walks in. I spotted him near the railing immediately. Same height, same shoulders, same eyes. For about 5 seconds my brain refused to accept it. Then it clicked. The beard was trimmed differently, the hair styled another way, but it was him. Ryan, Marcus, Daniel, all of them. He smiled like this was just another normal first date. I sat down slowly, heart beating harder than it should have. I studied his face openly this time. He seemed amused by my expression. Halfway through the first drink, I asked directly if we had matched before under a different name. He did not hesitate. He nodded casually and said yes, technically 3 times. He said it like someone admitting they changed their hairstyle. He explained it without embarrassment. He built 3 profiles intentionally. Same core person, different emphasis. Ryan represented his introverted, stable side. Marcus was his ambitious, assertive side. Daniel was the carefree version. He said dating apps reward niche appeal, so he tested which traits generated which reactions. He said he considered it social research. I felt my stomach tighten while he described it calmly, almost proudly. I asked why he continued conversations with me across all 3 identities. He said because my responses varied. With Ryan, I was polite but cautious. With Marcus, I was more engaged and slightly competitive. With Daniel, I seemed relaxed and open. He said it revealed how people mirror energy subconsciously. He talked like he was presenting findings from a study. I sat there realizing I had unknowingly participated in something structured. He admitted he intentionally let the first 2 conversations fade to see if I would engage with the third version differently. He said timing matters in testing authenticity. That word authenticity felt twisted in this context. I asked if the photos were all recent. He said yes, just styled strategically. Different clothes, different angles, slight posture changes. He even adjusted lighting to highlight different moods. He described it like marketing. I asked which version was real. He shrugged and said all of them are real. Personality is fluid depending on context. He said people adapt in different environments anyway, so he simply made the variations visible. That answer unsettled me more than if he had admitted one was fake. It meant there was no fixed baseline, just adjustable presentations. As the second drink arrived, I realized how methodical he was. He tracked response times, word counts, emoji frequency. He said he documented how long it took me to reply to each version. He noticed I responded faster to Marcus but wrote longer messages to Daniel. He interpreted that as attraction mixed with comfort. I felt exposed knowing he had measured things I never thought about consciously. He told me most women never realized. A few suspected but could not prove it. Some even thought it was clever when he confessed later. He said modern dating is already performative, so he simply optimized his own performance. He leaned back in his chair and asked which version I liked most. It felt like he was offering menu options. I kept replaying our conversations in my head, the subtle shifts, the way each version felt distinct. I wondered how much of my personality had been shaped in response to what I thought was three different men. It was not just deception. It was manipulation of perception. He said meeting in person is the final stage of the experiment because eventually one version dominates naturally. I suddenly wondered which one I was sitting across from. When the bill came, it totaled $54. He paid without hesitation and joked that Daniel believes in traditional gestures. Even that comment felt scripted. Outside, the air was cool and the city hummed below. He walked beside me and asked if I was impressed by the strategy. Strategy. That word echoed. Later that night, he sent me a long message summarizing everything. He broke down our conversations chronologically, comparing tone shifts and engagement patterns. He said I was one of the most interesting participants because I responded uniquely to each persona. Participant. That was the word that stayed with me. I read the message twice, feeling more unsettled each time. He ended by saying he would be happy to continue as whichever version made me most comfortable. That was when I realized there would never be a stable version. There would always be adjustments depending on desired outcomes. I blocked all three profiles at once. The strangest part is that he never raised his voice, never lied when confronted. He believed he was innovative, strategic, intelligent. The rooftop still glows every weekend with people laughing under string lights, drinks balanced on narrow tables. But whenever I think about that night, I remember sitting across from one face that had already been three different people and realizing I never actually met anyone solid at all. I did not feel unsafe. I felt documented. That was worse somehow. I met Dylan on a Thursday night at a brewery that smelled like citrus hops and fried food. It was loud but not chaotic, the kind of place where people pretend they are casual about craft beer, but still photograph the foam before taking a sip. He looked exactly like his photos. Slightly messy hair, dark jacket, easy grin. When he hugged me hello, it felt normal. Not too close. Not awkward. Just standard first date energy. I remember thinking he seemed low pressure, which was rare. We grabbed a small table near the back. The menu was printed on recycled paper, and every drink had some dramatic description about being barrel-aged or infused. He ordered something that cost $14 and told me I should try it too. I picked something cheaper because I did not want to feel like I owed him anything. The conversation started light. Work, weekend plans, dumb dating app stories. He had this relaxed way of talking that made everything feel easy. I caught myself laughing more than I expected. About an hour in, the conversation shifted toward dating culture. He said modern dating feels like performance art. I agreed in a general way. He asked if I had ever had a date go horribly wrong. I shared a mild story about someone showing up late and clearly uninterested. He listened closely, nodding slowly. Then he said something that felt almost like a casual aside. He said he likes analyzing those kinds of stories with his online group. I assumed he meant friends, like a group chat. I asked what kind of group. He smiled slightly and said it was a private forum, a space where men share screenshots of conversations and date recaps to discuss patterns in behavior. I felt a small pause inside my chest. I asked what kind of patterns. He said communication styles, red flags, compatibility signals. He said it like it was educational. I tried to keep my tone neutral and asked if he shared his own conversations there. He nodded, calmly. He said he anonymizes names but posts screenshots regularly. He said it helps him get perspective. He said sometimes other members point out warning signs he might have missed. I stared at him, trying to decide if he understood how invasive that sounded. He leaned back and took a sip of his drink. He explained that the forum has thousands of members, mostly men discussing modern relationships. He said they analyze everything from response times to emoji usage. He even admitted they sometimes rate women's behavior on a scale to determine long-term potential. He laughed lightly like it was harmless. My stomach tightened. I asked if he had posted our conversation. He did not hesitate. He said yes, parts of it. He said our initial exchange about weekend plans sparked an interesting thread about initiative. I felt heat rise in my face. That conversation was private. It felt small and normal at the time. Now I was picturing strangers dissecting it. He added quickly that he removed my name and profile photo, as if that erased the problem. He pulled out his phone and said he could show me an example if I wanted. I did not want to, but curiosity got the better of me. He scrolled through a dark-themed forum interface filled with usernames and long comment threads. I saw screenshots of text conversations blurred at the top, but fully readable otherwise. I saw comments rating responses. People debating whether certain phrases indicated insecurity. It felt like walking into a room where everyone was studying people who did not know they were being studied. He pointed at one thread and said it was his. I recognized my message instantly. A joke I made about hating early morning meetings. Dozens of comments underneath it analyzing tone. Some saying I seemed ambitious. Others saying I might be high maintenance. My chest felt tight. I had not consented to this. He said I should not take it personally. It is all anonymous. I asked why he thought this was acceptable. He shrugged and said everyone shares stories with friends. This is just more structured. He said women have group chats too. He framed it like balance, like fairness. But this was different. This was archived. Searchable. Permanent. I imagined pieces of my personality sitting in a database for strangers to critique. He tried to reassure me. He said he values transparency and thought I would appreciate intellectual discussion. He said the forum helps men avoid unhealthy relationships. He said sometimes women benefit too because members point out communication flaws he can address early. That explanation made it worse. It meant he saw feedback about me as data for self-improvement. The brewery suddenly felt louder. Glasses clinking. Music pulsing. Conversations overlapping. I became hyper-aware of every word I had already said that night. Every detail about my job, my hobbies, my family. Had that been screenshotted too? He noticed my expression change and asked if I was uncomfortable. I said yes. He looked genuinely confused. He said most women he dates never mind once he explains the purpose. He admitted a few have asked him to delete posts. He said he usually complies if the request is reasonable. Reasonable? I asked what qualified as reasonable. He said if the thread did not gain much engagement. The casual way he said engagement made my stomach turn. When the check came, it was $38. He paid and said he would post a recap later about how transparency conversations affect chemistry. I stared at him, unsure if he was joking. He was not. Outside, the air felt sharp and cold. He walked beside me and asked if I would be open to a second date. He said the forum would be curious to see how things progressed. Later that night, he sent me a link, not directly to the forum because it was private, but to a screenshot of a new thread titled When Disclosure Backfires. My stomach dropped. He had already written about my reaction. I read it twice, feeling my privacy shrink with every sentence. He described my facial expressions, my tone shifts, the exact moment I crossed my arms. Strangers commented that I seemed defensive, that I might not handle criticism well. I felt reduced to bullet points. He ended the message by saying he values my perspective and would love to continue the discussion in person. I did not respond. I blocked his number. The next morning, I went back through our original messages and felt a strange detachment, like they were no longer ours. They had been repurposed. What unsettles me most is not that he shared screenshots. It is that he believed he was being analytical, not invasive. He genuinely thought crowdsourcing opinions about someone mid-date was progressive. The brewery still exists. People still laugh over overpriced drinks. But whenever I pass it, I think about how easily private moments can be copied, pasted, and judged by people who were never supposed to see them. The first thing I noticed about Aaron was not the ring. It was how calm he was. Not nervous. Not trying too hard. Just steady. A kind of steady that makes you lower your guard without realizing it. We met at a quiet wine bar tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner, one of those places you only find if someone specifically tells you about it. Dim amber lights, brick walls, small wooden tables close enough that you could hear other conversations if you tried. It felt intimate but not romantic. Mature. That was the word that kept floating in my head. Mature. He was already there when I walked in, sitting upright with 2 glasses of red wine on the table like he had calculated my arrival down to the minute. He stood up immediately when he saw me, smiled warmly, and pulled out my chair. No awkward handshake. No overconfident hug, just composed. His voice was low and even. And that is why I ignored the ring. It was simple. Silver band. No engraving that I could see. It sat comfortably on his left hand like it had been there a long time. I noticed it within the first minute but decided not to jump to conclusions. Plenty of people wear rings casually. Maybe it meant nothing. The first 30 minutes were smooth. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, about where I live, about whether I see myself staying in the city long term. He listened fully before responding. No interruptions, no competing stories. It felt adult in a way I was not used to. Most of my previous dates had felt rushed or shallow. Aaron felt measured, grounded. He talked about his job in finance without bragging. Mentioned that he liked stability and long-term planning. Said he was at a stage in life where he valued depth over chaos. I remember thinking that dating someone slightly older might actually be refreshing. He seemed certain about who he was. Then he picked up his wine glass and the ring caught the light. It was subtle, but once I noticed it again, I could not unsee it. I waited a few more minutes before asking. I kept my tone light, casual, like it was no big deal. He did not flinch. He did not hide his hand under the table. He did not look embarrassed. He simply nodded and said, "Yes, I am technically still married." Technically. The word landed heavier than the confession. I stared at him, expecting a rush of explanation or apology. Instead, he took another sip of wine before continuing. He explained that he and his wife had been emotionally separated for almost a year. They no longer shared a bedroom. They no longer functioned as a couple. They were simply waiting for the legal process to finalize what had already ended in practice. He said it calmly, like he was explaining a delayed flight. I asked if she knew he was dating. He paused slightly, just long enough for me to notice. Then he said she knows they are separated and that he is moving forward with his life. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He shifted the answer sideways. He went on to explain that divorce can take time. Paperwork, asset division, legal scheduling. He said it could cost around $15,000 by the time everything was resolved. He spoke about it like a transaction that simply needed processing. I asked why he had not mentioned this before meeting. He said conversations like that are better handled in person because tone can be misinterpreted over text. He said many women react emotionally without context. That sentence sat uncomfortably between us. It suggested I was now being evaluated on whether I would react emotionally. He leaned forward slightly and said he values transparency. Some men, he said, hide separation for months. He preferred to disclose early so there were no misunderstandings. It was positioned like a favor. I asked what he was looking for while still legally married. He did not hesitate. He said dating helps him rebuild connection skills after years of routine. He said it helps him remember how to open up. He called it practice for when he is officially single again. Practice. That word did something inside me. It reframed the entire night. I was not a potential partner. I was rehearsal. He noticed my expression shift and reassured me that he is not looking for casual distraction. He wants something meaningful. He simply does not see the value in putting his life on pause for paperwork. Life is short, he said. But his life was not paused. His marriage was still legally active. He described their home situation next. They still live in the same house for financial reasons. Separate bedrooms. Minimal interaction. He said it was civil, mature, strategic. I imagined the house, the shared kitchen, the shared hallway, the living room with furniture chosen together, family photos possibly still on walls, the weight of shared history still physically present around him. He assured me there was no intimacy between them anymore. He emphasized that multiple times. No intimacy. No emotional closeness. Just logistics. The way he categorized intimacy felt clinical, as if removing that element dissolved the marriage entirely. The check arrived eventually. It totaled $72. He paid without hesitation and made a small comment about how at least this expense was predictable compared to legal fees. He smiled as he said it. Outside, the night air felt sharper than when I had arrived. He walked beside me calmly, hands in his coat pockets. He said he felt a connection and would like to continue seeing me during this transition period. Transition. Everything about his language softened what was actually happening. Married became technically married. Separation became transition. Dating became practice. I asked what would happen if his wife found out specifics. He said she likely would not care. They are both focused on moving forward. He said it confidently, but there was a small tightness in his jaw that contradicted the ease of his words. Later that night, he sent a long message clarifying his situation further. He reiterated the timeline, explained that court dates were scheduled but delayed, mentioned that he sleeps in the guest room. He even attached a photo of what he said was his separate bedroom, as if visual proof would make it less complicated. I'd read the message twice. The photo did not comfort me, it unsettled me. Seeing part of the house made it more real. The neutral walls, the dresser, the faint outline on the ring finger still visible in the image. The next morning, he texted again. He said he understands if I need time to process. He added that mature relationships require patience and emotional intelligence. There it was again, mature. The implication hovered quietly. If I walked away, would I be immature? If I stayed, would I be understanding? I spent most of that day replaying the conversation in my head. The calm delivery, the logical framing, the way he turned every potentially uncomfortable truth into a practical inconvenience. What unsettled me most was not anger. He was not cruel, not aggressive, not even dishonest technically. He told the truth, but he told it in a way that minimized its weight. Being legally married is not a small detail. It is not a scheduling conflict. It is not a phase. It is a reality with legal, emotional, and social implications. And he was inviting me into that gray area like it was an opportunity. I imagined continuing to see him. Imagined him leaving the house he still shared with his wife to meet me for dinner. Imagined going on dates while knowing there was still a marriage certificate with his name on it. Imagined friends asking about him and me having to explain the technical separation. Every scenario felt like standing in someone else's unfinished story. He texted again 2 days later asking if I would be open to dinner next week. He said he respects boundaries but hopes I do not dismiss something meaningful over timing. Timing. As if the issue was simply inconvenient scheduling rather than a legally binding commitment still active. I never yelled at him. I never sent a dramatic message. I simply stopped responding. After a few more polite follow-ups, he stopped too. The wine bar still exists, soft lights glowing in the window, quiet tables tucked into corners. From the outside, nothing about that place suggests complication. But for me, it will always be where someone calmly tried to convince me that marriage is just paperwork when feelings fade. And I realized I do not want to build something new in the shadow of something that is not fully over. The first time he said her name, he said it like it was just background information. By the end of the night, I felt like I had been sitting across from both of them. Connor picked the restaurant, which should not matter but somehow does. It was one of those minimalist sushi places with pale wood tables, hanging lantern lights, and a quiet hum of conversation that makes everything feel more serious than it is. Not romantic exactly, just intentional. I remember thinking he seemed different from other guys I had gone out with. He was punctual, well dressed without trying too hard, calm in a way that felt stable. When he stood up to greet me, he held eye contact just long enough to make me feel noticed. We ordered simple rolls and miso soup. The total ended up being $52, and he insisted on paying without hesitation. He said he believes in starting things with generosity. That word generosity stuck in my head later. At the time, it just felt polite. The first half hour was normal. He asked about where I live, what I studied, what I wanted long-term. I told him about switching jobs recently and how nervous I had been about the decision. He nodded thoughtfully and said his ex once made a big career shift too. He said it lightly, almost casually. He added that it did not work out for her in the end. I assumed it was just a passing comment. People reference exes sometimes. It did not immediately raise alarms. But then it happened again. When I mentioned that I prefer quiet weekends over parties, he smiled and said that sounds familiar. His ex used to claim she hated crowds but secretly loved attention. He laughed softly when he said it. Not bitter, not angry, just analytical. I felt something tighten in my chest. It was subtle, but I realized I was no longer just describing myself. I was stepping into comparison territory. As the evening continued, he kept weaving her into the conversation. Not dramatically, not obsessively, just enough that she hovered there. When I talked about valuing loyalty, he said loyalty is complicated because his ex believed she was loyal until she felt misunderstood. When I said I try to communicate openly, he nodded and said communication was the thing she struggled with most. Each time, it sounded like reflection, growth, self-awareness, but underneath it, I felt evaluated. He pulled out his phone at one point to show me a photo from a trip to the coast. The ocean looked gray and windy behind him. In the corner of the image, partially cropped, was a woman. I could see her smile clearly before he swiped to the next picture. He said it was taken during the final good months of their relationship. He did not linger on it, but the image stayed with me. He asked how I handle conflict. I said I prefer talking things through before they build up. He nodded slowly and said his ex used to say the same thing but often avoided direct confrontation. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Every answer I gave seemed to unlock a comparison. I started choosing my words more carefully, not because I wanted to impress him, but because I did not want to accidentally mirror someone who would hurt him. That shift in my behavior unsettled me. I was adapting in real time to avoid fitting into a narrative I had never agreed to. Halfway through dinner, he leaned back and said he believes in learning from the past. He said most people repeat mistakes because they ignore patterns. He prefers to identify them early. The way he said early made my stomach drop slightly. We were barely 90 minutes into our first meeting. He described his ex in fragments throughout the night. Intelligent but inconsistent. Warm but impulsive. Supportive but insecure. Every trait came with a slight glance in my direction, like he was measuring alignment. I felt I was sitting for an unspoken exam. When dessert menus were offered, he declined and said he prefers clarity over indulgence. I laughed lightly, but he did not. He asked about my longest relationship. I answered honestly, explaining that it ended because we grew in different directions. He nodded and said that is similar to how his began to fall apart too. Similar again. He told me he does not want to waste time anymore. He said he is looking for someone who can break the pattern. That phrase echoed in my head. Break the pattern. It implied that the pattern was already mapped out, waiting to repeat. The more he spoke, the more I realized he was not fully present with me. He was observing me through the lens of what happened before. When I laughed at a joke, he watched closely. When I hesitated before answering a question, he noticed. He even pointed out that I paused slightly before discussing emotional topics. He said his ex used to do that too. The comparison did not feel accidental. It felt habitual. When the bill came, he paid the $52 again without comment. Outside, the air felt cooler than when I arrived. He walked beside me calmly and said he appreciates how self-aware I seem. He added that I handled certain discussions better than his ex would have. That sentence landed harder than all the others. It meant the comparison was not in my head. It was active. Later that night, he sent a message thanking me for a thoughtful evening. He mentioned that he noticed I maintained eye contact during difficult topics, which shows emotional maturity. He added that his ex avoided eye contact when confronted. I read the message twice, feeling the weight of being analyzed instead of known. The next morning, he followed up asking if I would be open to another date so he could explore compatibility further. Explore compatibility sounded like an evaluation phase. I imagined future dinners where every opinion, every reaction would be cross-referenced against someone who still lived in his memory. What unsettled me most was not jealousy. It was the realization that I never had the chance to be neutral in his mind. I was not a blank slate. I was a potential correction, a possible upgrade, or another repetition. I thought about how exhausting it would be to constantly wonder whether I was being myself or defending against a ghost. I do not want to compete with someone who is not even in the room. I do not want to prove I am not her. I never responded to his last message. I let the conversation fade quietly. The sushi place still glows softly at night, lantern lights reflecting against polished tables. From the outside, it looks peaceful. But for me, it is the place where I realized some people do not date you as you are. They date you as a comparison chart. And I refuse to be someone's attempt at rewriting their past. I did not know someone could audit you before ever shaking your hand. The night started quiet. Not dramatic, not strange. Just quiet in a way that made everything feel controlled. Luke picked the restaurant, which was not surprising. He said he preferred places where you could assess compatibility without distraction. At the time, I thought that meant he hated loud music. Now I know he meant something else entirely. The restaurant was one of those polished Italian spots downtown where the lighting is dim but intentional. The kind of place that makes you sit up straighter without realizing it. Crisp white tablecloths. Soft instrumental music. Glasses placed exactly 2 inches from the plate edge like someone measured them. I arrived a few minutes early and he was already there standing near the entrance, hands folded in front of him like he had been waiting longer than he admitted. He did not hug me. He shook my hand. Firm. Controlled. Brief. He complimented my punctuality. That word should have been my first warning. We sat down and ordered pasta and a bottle of house wine. The total would later come to $94, which he paid immediately without even glancing at the receipt. He did not hesitate, did not joke about it, did not make it performative. He just signed cleanly and slid the booklet back. Efficient. The first 20 minutes were textbook. He asked about my job and my responsibilities, whether I saw upward mobility in my company. I told him about working in project management and how I eventually wanted to oversee larger accounts. He listened closely. Not smiling much, just absorbing information. Then he asked what neighborhood I grew up in. I answered casually. He nodded in a way that felt like confirmation. Not curiosity. Confirmation. That was when the shift began. He asked what my parents did professionally. I told him my mom worked in education and my dad owned a small contracting business. He asked if the business was incorporated. The question felt oddly specific. I said, yes, I think so. He nodded again like he had already known that. I laughed lightly and asked if he was building a profile on me. He did not laugh back. He said he believes in thoroughness. He asked if my parents still owned their home. I said yes. They bought it years ago. He asked roughly how long ago. I shrugged and guessed around 25 years. He leaned back slightly and said that shows long-term stability. Stability. The word hung there. I asked why that mattered for a first date. He took a sip of wine before answering. He said background shapes financial literacy. Financial literacy shapes long-term compatibility. He spoke calmly, like he was explaining a universal law. I tried to brush it off. Plenty of people care about financial alignment. That alone is not disturbing. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. He said he likes to do due diligence before investing time emotionally. Due diligence. He clarified. He had looked up public property records connected to my last name. He checked business registrations for my dad's company. He searched scholarship announcements from my college to confirm my academic history. He even said he found a local article that mentioned my high school graduation award. My fork stopped midair. He said it so casually, so confidently, as if he expected me to be impressed. I asked how long he had been looking into this. He said the night before we met. The night before. While I was choosing what dress to wear, he was searching public databases. He explained that he never goes into meetings blind. That word meetings did not feel accidental. He likes understanding asset trajectory, debt exposure, and long-term earning potential. He said relationships are partnerships and partnerships require vetting. Vetting. I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical safety. It was informational exposure. He asked if I had student loans. I said yes, a manageable amount. He asked how much. I laughed in disbelief. He remained serious. He said numbers matter. I refused to give specifics. He did not push aggressively, but he did not retreat either. He simply noted that reluctance around financial transparency can signal incompatibility. Signal incompatibility. It was like he was writing notes in his head. He admitted he once dated someone for 3 months before discovering she carried significant credit card debt. He ended it immediately. He said financial imbalance breeds resentment. He described it like a case study. The restaurant suddenly felt brighter, the candlelight harsher. I became hyper-aware of how much information he already had without my consent. He said he prefers marrying within similar brackets. That word brackets made my chest tighten. He described his own net worth casually. Diversified investments, long-term index funds, real estate. He mentioned that his current portfolio growth suggests strong upward mobility. He smiled slightly when he said upward mobility. I realized then that I was not sitting across from a date. I was sitting across from someone performing an evaluation. He said he was impressed that my parents purchased their home before the market spike. He said that implies disciplined decision-making. I asked what would have happened if they rented instead. He shrugged and said it would alter the projection. Projection. Like I was a financial forecast model. He even mentioned he looked at the average salary range for my job title in the city. He said it aligns well with his expectations. Expectations. I asked if he had researched anything else. He paused, then admitted he ran a background check through a public records search site that cost $39. He said it was worth it for clarity. I felt heat rise up my neck. He said it revealed no criminal records, no major liabilities, no outstanding lawsuits. He said that was reassuring. Reassuring. Like I was a risk assessment. The most disturbing part was how calm he remained. No shame. No secrecy. He believed this was rational, responsible, intelligent. When dessert menus were offered, he declined. He said sugar clouds judgment. He asked if I believed in merging finances after marriage. I said that depends on trust and communication. He nodded slowly and said trust is built on transparency. Transparency. He kept using words that sounded reasonable on the surface, but underneath, they were tools. The bill came, $94. He paid smoothly and said he prefers taking care of first dates because it demonstrates capacity. Capacity. Outside, the night air felt colder than before. He walked beside me calmly and said he sees promising indicators in my financial discipline so far. So far. That phrase made something snap internally. Later that night, he sent me a detailed message summarizing the evening. He listed traits he found compatible: work ethic, family stability, earning potential. He attached an article about strategic marriage planning. I read it twice. He framed the night like progress in a screening process. The next morning, he followed up asking if I would like to continue exploring alignment. Exploring alignment sounded like a corporate merger discussion. I imagined future holidays where he analyzed spending patterns instead of enjoying moments. Imagine arguments about investment distribution instead of communication. Imagine constantly feeling evaluated. What unsettled me most was not that he valued finances. It was that he investigated mine without consent and believed that was intelligent. He did not see people. He saw portfolios. I blocked his number quietly. The Italian restaurant still glows warmly every evening, couples leaning across tables sharing pasta and wine. From the outside, nothing about it suggests calculation. But for me, it is the place where I realized someone had already studied my family's mortgage history before even learning my favorite color. And that kind of preparation does not feel like love. It feels like acquisition. I did not find out because someone exposed him. I found out because he got tired of pretending and decided the reveal would make him look bold instead of dishonest. Jason and I met at a bookstore cafe on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of place that smells like espresso and paper and feels safe by default. It was bright inside, sunlight pouring through tall windows, people scattered around reading quietly or typing on laptops. It felt low pressure, public, harmless. That is probably why I relaxed so quickly. His profile said he was 28. I was 25, so it felt reasonable. He looked a little older than his photos, but not dramatically. Good skin, trimmed beard, casual sweater, confident posture. When he stood up to greet me, he hugged me lightly and said he was glad we finally met in person. His voice was calm and steady, not nervous, not overeager. We ordered coffee and pastries that came out to $22, which he paid without hesitation. He made a small joke about bookstore cafes being overpriced but worth it. Everything felt normal. For the first hour, we talked about books we pretended to have fully read and travel places we wanted to see. He told me about his job in consulting. Said he moved around a lot for work but was trying to settle into a more stable routine. He spoke like someone who had their life together. Career path clear. Finances steady. He asked thoughtful questions about my goals. Nothing about it felt strange. If anything, he seemed slightly more mature than most guys my age, less impulsive, more reflective. I thought maybe I had just gotten lucky. About halfway through the second round of coffee, he started talking about long-term planning, retirement funds, investment growth, real estate timing. I laughed and said I barely think 5 years ahead. He smiled in a way that felt amused but slightly distant. Then he asked how I feel about age gaps in relationships. I shrugged and said it depends on how big the gap is. A few years does not matter. He leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. Then he said he had something to tell me, and that he prefers honesty once a connection feels promising. That sentence felt heavier than the setting deserved. He said he is not 28. I blinked. He said he is 38, 10 years older than his profile claimed. The noise of the cafe suddenly felt sharper. Cups clinking, pages turning, someone laughing in the distance. I stared at him, waiting for a punchline. There was none. He said he uses 28 on dating apps as a filter experiment. He said women his age often come with expectations he does not align with, and women younger tend to be more open-minded. He said lowering his age increases match volume and allows him to connect before numbers bias perception. He said it calmly, almost proudly. I asked why he thought that was acceptable. He smiled slightly and said age is just a number. Compatibility matters more. He said if he had listed 38, I might have swiped left without ever knowing how well we could talk. He framed it like he had saved me from my own prejudice. My stomach tightened slowly. He admitted he has been doing this for years. He adjusts the age depending on what range he wants to attract. Sometimes 30, sometimes 29, rarely his real age. He said it is fascinating to observe how perception changes once he reveals the truth. Perception. I have as part of the study again. I asked how many women he told after meeting. He said he usually waits until the second or third date. He said he told me early because he felt potential. That word potential felt manipulative now. He leaned forward and said think about it logically. If everything about him stayed the same except the number, why should it matter? He said he is in better shape than most 30-year-olds. He said he invests wisely. He said he has more stability than men closer to my age. It was not about stability. It was about consent to the truth. I asked what else he adjusted on his profile. He hesitated briefly before admitting he also shaved 2 years off his career timeline. Said it makes him seem more ambitious. He laughed lightly and said everyone tweaks details online. I realized then that I did not know which parts were real. He said he wanted to test whether chemistry could override initial bias. He said he sees it as social experimentation. That word again. Experimentation. I felt less like a person and more like data. The cafe felt smaller suddenly, warmer, too enclosed. He asked if I would have swiped right if I knew he was 38. I answered honestly and said probably not. He nodded like he expected that. He said exactly. That is why he does it. Exactly. He said revealing the truth face-to-face forces people to confront their assumptions. He said most women stay after hearing it. He seemed confident in that statistic. I asked what happens when they do not. He shrugged and said then they were not open-minded enough. Open-minded enough. The conversation shifted from casual to tense without him raising his voice once. He stayed calm, logical, structured. He believed he was proving something. When the check came for the second round of coffee, another $18, he paid again and joked that at least he is honest about expenses. The joke fell flat. Outside, the sunlight felt harsher than before. He walked beside me and said he hopes I can see past the number. He said 10 years is insignificant long-term. He talked about how women often mature faster anyway. That comment made something inside me recoil. Later that night, he sent a long message explaining his reasoning again. He said he values authenticity but believes timing of truth matters. He said revealing his real age upfront reduces opportunity unfairly. He said he prefers to establish connection first. I read it slowly. He never once used the word lie. He used adjust, optimize, test. The next morning, he followed up asking if I wanted to continue seeing where things go. He said he felt rare chemistry and would hate to let numbers ruin something meaningful. But numbers were not the issue. Trust was. I kept thinking about how easily he told it, how practiced the explanation sounded. How many other first dates had sat across from him, believing one version of reality before he flipped it? What unsettled me most was not that he was older. It was that he controlled the information deliberately and believed the reveal made him bold instead of dishonest. I never replied. I blocked his number quietly. The bookstore cafe still smells like coffee and paper every Sunday afternoon. People still sit near the window reading quietly. From the outside, it feels safe. But for me, it is the place where I learned that sometimes the biggest lie is not dramatic. It is just 10 years placed carefully in the wrong direction. The first thing I saw when I sat down was a manila folder. Not a menu. Not a drink. A folder. Matthew chose the location, which in hindsight makes sense. It was a quiet coffee shop attached to a co-working space, the kind of place where people hold meetings instead of dates. Glass walls. Neutral colors. Tables spaced far enough apart that conversations feel semi-private but still exposed. It smelled like roasted beans and printer paper. I remember thinking it felt more like an interview venue than a romantic setting, but I brushed that off because some people just prefer calm environments. He was already seated when I arrived. Back straight, laptop closed in front of him, the folder placed neatly to the side. He stood, shook my hand, and smiled politely. Not warm, not cold, just controlled. We ordered drinks that came to $16. He paid immediately and kept the receipt, sliding it into the folder without comment. That small detail stayed with me later. For the first 10 minutes, everything felt relatively normal. He asked about where I lived, what I studied, what I was looking for long-term. He maintained eye contact but rarely laughed. His responses were concise, efficient, like he had practiced small talk as a skill rather than enjoying it naturally. Then he opened the folder. Inside were printed sheets of paper. Numbered questions, bullet points, sections highlighted in pale yellow. He said he believes compatibility should be assessed deliberately instead of emotionally. He said chemistry can be misleading. Structure prevents wasted time. I thought he was joking. I actually laughed. He did not. He slid the top sheet toward me. It was titled Foundational Alignment. Underneath were questions about long-term goals, financial habits, conflict resolution styles, and family planning timelines. Each question had multiple choice options and blank space for elaboration. My stomach tightened slowly. He said he developed the questionnaire after several failed relationships. He noticed patterns and decided to formalize the screening process. He said he used to waste months discovering fundamental incompatibilities that could have been identified within hours. Within hours. He picked up a pen. He asked the first question out loud. Do you see yourself married within 5 years? He waited for my answer while holding the pen ready. I said maybe, depending on circumstances. He wrote something down quickly. I asked what he was writing. He said qualitative notes. The caffeine noise faded into the background. I became hyper-aware of how still he was, how focused. He moved through the questions methodically. Children, yes or no, and if yes, within what time frame. Preferred financial structure, joint accounts, separate accounts, hybrid. Career priority versus family priority, ranked 1 through 5. It did not feel like conversation. It felt like data collection. He asked how I handle conflict. I said I prefer open communication. He asked for an example. I gave one. He nodded and wrote again. I noticed he was scoring responses lightly in the margin. Small numbers circled beside certain answers. I asked what the numbers meant. He said weighted alignment indicators. Weighted alignment indicators. I stared at him, trying to understand whether he realized how surreal this was. He said relationships fail because people rely on emotion instead of metrics. He believes attraction should be secondary to strategic alignment. He flipped to the next page. Lifestyle patterns, sleep schedules, social frequency, travel preferences, health habits, even minor things like how often I check my phone. Every answer became a mark on paper. At one point, I asked if he had ever considered that real connection cannot be quantified. He responded calmly that connection is sustained by compatible structures. Without alignment, chemistry decays. He sounded like he had rehearsed this argument many times. Halfway through, he said my responses were trending positively but flagged potential friction around work-life balance. I felt heat rise to my face. Flagged. He even referenced previous participants. He said women who scored high in independence but low in adaptability often struggled long-term. Participants. That word landed hard. I realized I was not special in this process. I was an entry in a system. When our drinks ran low, he asked if I would like another round to continue. The second order came to $14. He paid again, receipt straight into the folder. The next section was emotional resilience, hypothetical scenarios. If your partner loses their job, how do you respond? If extended family causes conflict, what is your stance? Each answer earned more notes. I felt myself shrinking slightly with every page turned. It was not aggressive. It was not loud. It was structured, controlled. That made it worse. He eventually closed the folder and leaned back. He said based on preliminary scoring, compatibility sat around 78%. He said anything above 75% warrants a second meeting. Preliminary scoring. I asked what happens if someone scores lower. He said he thanks them for their time and does not pursue further emotional investment. Efficient closure prevents prolonged harm. He believed this protected both parties. Outside, when we finally left, the late afternoon light felt disorienting. He walked beside me and said he appreciates my cooperation. He said very few women are open-minded enough to participate fully. Later that evening, he sent me a PDF. He had scanned my responses and attached a summary breakdown. It included categories, percentages, and improvement suggestions. He wrote that I demonstrated strong communication awareness but moderate risk tolerance around career transitions. He recommended discussing flexibility in future meetings. I read the document twice. It felt clinical, detached, as if he had evaluated a job applicant instead of shared coffee with someone new. The next morning, he followed up asking if I would like to schedule the second assessment session. He even proposed a timeline for deeper value exploration. What unsettled me most was not that he valued compatibility. It was that he replaced curiosity with calculation. He removed spontaneity entirely. There was no room for surprise. No room for growth outside his metrics. I never responded. I did not argue. I did not critique his system. I simply let the folder close permanently on me. The coffee shop still hosts quiet meetings behind glass walls. People sit with laptops and folders every day. From the outside, nothing about that table would have looked unusual. But for me, it will always be the place where someone tried to reduce human connection to percentages and called it protection. I did not realize I was being evaluated in real time until I saw my own sentence appear on his screen before I had even finished saying it. The night started in a way that felt intentionally casual. Owen picked a taco place near the edge of downtown, somewhere loud enough that you had to lean forward slightly to hear each other, but not so loud that you could not talk. String lights hung above the patio outside. Inside, metal chairs scraped against concrete floors and music pulsed softly under conversations. It felt young, easy, low pressure. I got there a few minutes early and watched people walk in and out through the glass door. When he arrived, he smiled like he had known me longer than he had. Quick hug, relaxed posture. Clean white shirt with sleeves rolled halfway up his arms like he wanted to look effortless. We ordered at the counter, 2 tacos each and drinks. The total was $34. He paid without hesitation and said I could grab the next one if there was a next one. That sounded playful. Normal. We found a narrow table by the window. At first, conversation moved smoothly. He asked where I live, what I did for work, whether I liked the city or dreamed of leaving. He told me about his sales job and how he loves reading people. He said he can usually tell within the first hour whether something has potential. I laughed and asked how accurate that radar is. He said almost always. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled. Not a polite check. A full grin like he had just read something funny. He typed quickly with both thumbs and flipped it face down. I did not think much of it. Everyone checks their phone. Then it buzzed again. This time, he did not flip it down immediately. He looked at the screen longer. His smile widened slightly. He typed another response. I asked if everything was okay. He nodded and said, yeah, just my group chat. The tacos arrived. I tried to reset the tone. We talked about travel. I said I would love to visit Italy someday. He nodded thoughtfully, then picked up his phone and typed something while I was still mid-sentence. That was when I felt the first shift. He did not hide it. He angled the screen slightly toward himself, but not away from me. I caught a glimpse of the chat name. Something generic. 7 participants. Messages flying in quickly. I asked, half joking, if I was being discussed. He looked up and laughed. Actually, yeah. He said it so casually that it took a second to register. He explained that his friends always stay updated during first dates. It is tradition. They give commentary, advice, observations. He said it makes things more interesting. I stared at him. He shrugged and turned the phone toward me briefly. I saw my name shortened into a nickname. I saw a message from him that said she seems chill so far. Another from one of his friends asking what she ordered. Another asking if I had mentioned exes yet. I felt heat crawl up my neck. He said, relax, it is harmless. Women have group chats too. The only difference is timing. They do it after. We do it during. During. The word landed heavy. He typed again. I watched him do it. He wrote that I said Italy and that I seemed low maintenance about food. Almost instantly, 3 replies came back. One said green flag. Another said ask about family next. A third said check if she is career focused. He looked up at me with this amused expression like he was sharing something clever. I asked if they could see photos. He hesitated for half a second, then admitted he sent one when I walked in. Just a quick snap. Nothing weird. Nothing weird. I had not noticed him taking the photo. My stomach dropped slowly, not dramatically. Just a sinking realization that I was not in control of how I was being presented. He said they help him stay sharp. If he misses something, they catch it. If I say something questionable, they analyze it. He described it like a performance team. I suddenly felt like I was on stage. He asked about my job next. Sales, marketing, management. When I answered, his phone buzzed again. He glanced down and laughed softly. He told me one of his friends said to ask if I am planning to climb the corporate ladder or if I value work-life balance. I stopped smiling. He actually asked the question immediately after reading it, word for word. It felt scripted. I realized then that parts of this conversation were not even his. They were crowdsourced. I tried to regain control by asking him something personal. What was his biggest fear? He paused for a moment, then glanced at his phone before answering. That was when I understood fully. Even his vulnerability was being curated in collaboration. The music in the restaurant felt louder, the lights harsher. I could hear people laughing at nearby tables and wondered how many of them were being live-reported to unseen audiences. He kept typing. I watched him describe my facial expressions. He wrote that I seemed slightly tense now. One of his friends replied with a laughing emoji and said, push harder. Push harder. I asked what that meant. He shrugged and said they think it is funny to see how people react under pressure. He said it builds character. Character. My hands felt cold. I asked if he ever considered how violating this feels. He said violating is dramatic. It is just transparency among friends. I pointed out that I did not consent to being discussed in real time. He said if he had asked, it would have changed the authenticity. Authenticity. The same word people use when they secretly record things. He admitted they rate dates afterward, scale from 1 to 10. Categories include attraction, compatibility, humor, and long-term potential. He said it is all in good fun. Good fun. I asked what he would rate me so far. He glanced at the screen and said the group consensus is strong 8, maybe 9 if the night ends well. The way he said it made me feel like a contestant waiting for a final score. When the check came, he paid the remaining $11 for extra drinks without comment. He typed one last message before standing up. Probably a summary. Outside, the string lights flickered softly. He walked beside me casually and said the group thinks I have potential. He said it like a compliment. I felt smaller than I had when I arrived. Later that night, he sent me a screenshot of the group chat. They were debating whether I seemed authentic or rehearsed. One asked if I laughed too hard at certain jokes. Another suggested testing boundaries next time. Testing boundaries. I read the screenshot twice. He said do not take it personally. They just want the best for him. But I was not an investment. I was not content. I was not entertainment. I blocked his number without responding. What unsettled me most was not that he shared details. It was that he believed the presence of an audience enhanced the date. That intimacy improves when diluted. That privacy is outdated. The taco place still glows every weekend with music and chatter. Couples still sit by the window believing their words belong only to them. But for me, that table by the glass is where I learned that sometimes you are not on a date. You are on display. The first thing he said that night was that he admired strategic thinking. I should have known that word would come back later in a way I would not like. Zachary picked a rooftop lounge attached to a hotel downtown. It was one of those places that tries to look effortless but is clearly expensive. Low couches, dim lighting, glass railing overlooking the city skyline. The drinks cost $19 each, and he ordered two without asking what I preferred. He said he trusts his instincts. I remember laughing lightly and thinking that sounded confident, not controlling. He looked polished. Tailored jacket. Watch that probably cost more than my rent. He spoke smoothly, not fast, not slow, just controlled. He asked about where I live, what I did for work, whether I enjoyed competition. That question felt slightly out of place, but I answered anyway. I said I am competitive with myself, not others. He nodded thoughtfully. The first hour felt like a standard ambitious guy date. He talked about his job in corporate law and how high-stakes negotiations energize him. He said he enjoys outmaneuvering opponents in subtle ways. He used words like leverage and positioning casually, like they belonged in everyday conversation. I assumed he was just passionate about his career. Then he started telling a story about a conflict at work. He said a colleague had been undermining him during meetings, quietly questioning his decisions, casting doubt in front of senior partners. He described it calmly, not angrily, almost analytically. He said he needed to neutralize the situation without escalating publicly. I asked how he handled it. He smiled. He said he built proximity. At first, I thought he meant he improved communication. That was not what he meant. He explained that he discovered his coworker had a younger sister who had recently moved to the city. He said he matched with her intentionally on a dating app after seeing her tagged in a photo. My stomach tightened slightly, but I assumed he was exaggerating for dramatic effect. He was not. He said he dated her for 3 months. Casual dinners, movie nights, enough to be visible but not serious. He said his coworker softened almost immediately once he realized there was personal overlap. Meetings became less hostile. Tension decreased. I stared at him. He continued as if this was impressive. He said relationships create leverage. When someone knows you are connected to their family, they think twice before creating conflict. He said it is not manipulation. It is strategic positioning. Strategic positioning. I asked if the sister knew any of this. He shrugged and said she thought it was organic. He claimed he did not lie directly. He just did not explain the initial motivation. My drink suddenly tasted bitter. He said once the workplace tension resolved, he gradually distanced himself from her. He framed it as a natural drift. He said he did not want to cause unnecessary harm, but the objective had been achieved. The first thing he said that night was that he admired strategic thinking. I should have known that word would come back later in a way I would not like. Zachary picked a rooftop lounge attached to a hotel downtown. It was one of those places that tries to look effortless but is clearly expensive. Low couches, dim lighting, glass railing overlooking the city skyline. The drinks cost $19 each, and he ordered two without asking what I preferred. He said he trusts his instincts. I remember laughing lightly and thinking that sounded confident, not controlling. He looked polished. Tailored jacket. Watch that probably cost more than my rent. He spoke smoothly, not fast, not slow, just controlled. He asked about where I live, what I did for work, whether I enjoyed competition. That question felt slightly out of place, but I answered anyway. I said I am competitive with myself, not others. He nodded thoughtfully. The first hour felt like a standard ambitious guy date. He talked about his job in corporate law and how high-stakes negotiations energize him. He said he enjoys outmaneuvering opponents in subtle ways. He used words like leverage and positioning casually, like they belonged in everyday conversation. I assumed he was just passionate about his career. Then he started telling a story about a conflict at work. He said a colleague had been undermining him during meetings, quietly questioning his decisions, casting doubt in front of senior partners. He described it calmly, not angrily, almost analytically. He said he needed to neutralize the situation without escalating publicly. I asked how he handled it. He smiled. He said he built proximity. At first, I thought he meant he improved communication. That was not what he meant. He explained that he discovered his coworker had a younger sister who had recently moved to the city. He said he matched with her intentionally on a dating app after seeing her tagged in a photo. My stomach tightened slightly, but I assumed he was exaggerating for dramatic effect. He was not. He said he dated her for 3 months. Casual dinners, movie nights, enough to be visible but not serious. He said his coworker softened almost immediately once he realized there was personal overlap. Meetings became less hostile. Tension decreased. I stared at him. He continued as if this was impressive. He said relationships create leverage. When someone knows you are connected to their family, they think twice before creating conflict. He said it is not manipulation. It is strategic positioning. Strategic positioning. I asked if the sister knew any of this. He shrugged and said she thought it was organic. He claimed he did not lie directly. He just did not explain the initial motivation. My drink suddenly tasted bitter. He said once the workplace tension resolved, he gradually distanced himself from her. He framed it as a natural drift. He said he did not want to cause unnecessary harm, but the objective had been achieved. He did not start with small talk. He started with paperwork. I walked to the restaurant expecting the usual first date routine. Awkward smile, quick hug, maybe a joke about traffic. Instead, Benjamin stood up from the table holding a folded sheet of paper like he was about to present something at a meeting. The restaurant was one of those quiet modern places with concrete walls and hanging lights shaped like glass bubbles. Not romantic exactly, clean, minimal. Every table spaced carefully apart so conversations stayed contained. I remember noticing how silent it felt compared to most places downtown, almost clinical. He shook my hand instead of hugging me. Firm grip. Short. Then he sat down and slid the folded paper across the table toward me. Before we order, he said calmly, I think transparency is important. I thought he was joking. I laughed lightly and reached for the menu instead. He did not laugh. He tapped the paper gently. I unfolded it slowly. At the top, in bold letters, it said Mutual Honesty Agreement. My stomach did not drop immediately. It tightened gradually. It was 1 page. Bullet points, short paragraphs. A signature line at the bottom. He explained that after several disappointing dating experiences, he decided to formalize expectations from the beginning. That way, no one wastes time. He said it calmly, like this was reasonable. The server came by and asked if we wanted drinks. Benjamin ordered sparkling water. I ordered the same because I suddenly felt self-conscious ordering anything stronger. The total for drinks would later be $8, which he paid immediately when they arrived, sliding the receipt neatly into his wallet without looking at it. I looked back down at the paper. Clause 1 stated that both parties agreed to disclose any ongoing romantic involvement with other individuals. Clause 2 required full honesty about age, employment status, and living arrangements. Clause 3 specified that intentional deception at any stage would result in immediate termination of contact. Termination of contact. It read less like a conversation starter and more like a contract. I asked if he was serious. He nodded. He said he believes clarity prevents emotional damage. He said too many people enter dating situations with hidden information and unrealistic expectations. This eliminates that. I scanned the rest of the document. There were sections about exclusivity timelines, financial transparency after 3 dates, and a requirement that both parties notify the other if feelings shift significantly. Notify. I asked if he actually expected me to sign it. He said ideally yes, but at minimum he wanted verbal agreement to the terms. He believed this set a strong foundation. Our appetizers arrived. The total for the meal would eventually come to $67. He insisted on paying, saying financial clarity works both ways. He said he values investment in promising situations. Investment again. I tried to steer the conversation towards something normal. Music, travel, childhood memories. But every topic somehow circled back to honesty and structure. When I mentioned I once ghosted someone after losing interest, he nodded and said that is exactly the type of behavior this agreement prevents. He said ghosting is cowardly and emotionally irresponsible. Under his agreement, I would be required to explicitly communicate loss of interest. I felt a strange pressure build inside my chest. It was not that I disagreed with communication. It was that he was trying to codify it before even knowing me. Halfway through dinner, he asked if I had ever lied in a relationship. The question felt heavy for a first meeting. I answered carefully. He nodded and said his last girlfriend lied about texting her ex. That betrayal inspired the agreement. Inspired. He spoke about it without visible anger. Calm. Controlled. Almost detached. He said pain teaches structure. Structure protects peace. I realized he was not joking about the signatures. He pulled out a pen from his jacket pocket and placed it beside the paper. I asked if he had done this with other women. He said yes. Some signed. Some laughed and left. He said the ones who signed lasted longer. That sentence unsettled me deeply. It implied compliance equaled compatibility. I asked what happens if someone signs and later breaks a clause. He said then they have proven themselves unreliable. He would end contact immediately. No discussion. No second chances. The final section of the agreement mentions social media boundaries. No posting about the relationship without mutual consent. No public commentary that could damage reputation. It felt less like trust and more like risk management. I imagined signing it. Imagine dating someone who would mentally reference clauses during disagreements. Imagine saying something impulsive and watching him recall line 3 subsection B. He leaned forward and said he does not want drama. He wants clarity. He said love should be built on documented expectations, not vague assumptions. Documented expectations. The server cleared our plates. The room felt warmer than before. I could hear faint conversations from other tables and wondered if anyone else had paperwork involved in their evening. I asked if he believed feelings can be structured. He said feelings are unreliable, but behavior can be standardized. He described how this agreement actually made him feel safer, like he was reducing emotional risk. He compared it to prenuptial agreements. Sensible, responsible. But this was a first date, not a marriage negotiation. He said I seem intelligent and self-aware, which makes me a strong candidate for mutual accountability. Candidate. When the check came, he paid the $67 without hesitation. He folded the agreement neatly and slid it back toward me, pen resting on top. I stared at the signature line, my name printed there in blank space. I realized then that this was not about honesty. It was about control. He wanted predictability, compliance, insurance against vulnerability. Outside, the night air felt colder than expected. He walked beside me and said he respects independent thinkers but believes structure is the only path to long-term success. He asked if I would consider reviewing the agreement at home and bringing it signed to our next meeting. Later that night, he sent a PDF version to my email. Subject line, clarity moving forward. I read it slowly in my bedroom, noticing even more detail than before. There was a clause about financial disclosure after 6 weeks. Another about discussing major life decisions before acting independently. It felt suffocating in its precision. The next morning, he followed up asking if I had any suggested amendments. Amendments, like we were negotiating a merger. What unsettled me most was not that he valued honesty. That part is reasonable. It was that he believed trust could be forced into existence through signatures. That vulnerability could be managed like paperwork. I never responded. I deleted the PDF. I blocked his number quietly. The restaurant still glows softly at night, glass bubble lights reflecting against polished tables. From the outside, it looks calm, orderly, predictable. But for me, it is the place where someone tried to turn connection into contract language before even learning my middle name. And I realized that sometimes the scariest thing is not dishonesty. It is someone trying to regulate your humanity before you have even had a chance to be human. I did not meet Adam on a dating app. That part is important. I met him handing out bottled water at a community food drive on a Saturday morning, both of us wearing those bright neon volunteer vests that make everyone look slightly ridiculous. It felt wholesome, harmless, the kind of meet-cute story you tell later and people smile at. The air that morning was cold and dry. We were setting up folding tables in a church parking lot while cars lined up slowly to collect boxes of groceries. Adam was already there when I arrived, stacking canned goods with quiet focus. He looked normal, plain hoodie, worn sneakers, soft voice. He smiled when I introduced myself and said he volunteers almost every weekend because it keeps him grounded. Grounded. That word landed warmly at the time. We worked side by side for hours, lifting boxes, directing traffic, passing out bags of rice and produce. It felt good doing something useful with someone who did not seem performative about it. He did not brag. He did not film himself helping. He just worked steadily. When we took a short break near the back of the lot, he offered me a bottle of water and asked what got me into volunteering. I told him I grew up watching my mom help neighbors whenever she could. It felt natural to give time when I had it. He nodded thoughtfully and said compassion is rare these days. After the event ended, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee nearby. It felt organic. No pressure. We walked 2 blocks to a small cafe with chipped wooden tables and handwritten menus taped to the wall. We ordered 2 coffees that came to $9, and he paid without making it a moment. The conversation flowed easily at first. We talked about how strange it is that so many people ignore local issues. He said he believes empathy is the most important trait in a partner. I agreed without hesitation. It felt aligned. That was before he told me why he volunteers. He leaned back slightly and said he should be honest about something. He said he did not start volunteering purely out of selflessness. He said he noticed that women who volunteer consistently tend to be more compassionate and emotionally generous. I laughed, assuming he meant that as a compliment. He did not laugh. He clarified that he specifically chooses community events where he is likely to meet women who demonstrate empathy publicly. He said it filters out superficial personalities. He said it is strategic. Strategic. The word felt heavier than it should have in that tiny cafe. I asked if he was joking. He shook his head calmly. He said dating apps are saturated with curated personas. Volunteering environments reveal character. He said people show who they are when they give time without payment. That part almost sounded reasonable. But then he added that compassionate women are often easier to influence long-term because they prioritize harmony over conflict. The sentence landed like something fragile cracking quietly. I stared at him. He did not look ashamed. He looked analytical, like he was explaining a method he had refined. He said he prefers partners who avoid confrontation and focus on understanding others. He said that type of personality builds stable dynamics. I asked what he meant by stable. He said less resistance, fewer power struggles, more flexibility. Flexibility. I realized slowly what he was describing. He was not just looking for kindness. He was looking for compliance disguised as empathy. He told me he has been volunteering in different neighborhoods for almost 3 years. Food drives, literacy programs, shelter outreach. He said each environment attracts slightly different personality types. He has observed patterns. Observed patterns. He spoke like someone conducting quiet research. I asked if he had dated women he met through these events before. He nodded, several. He said most were nurturing and supportive. He said the relationships ended when they became too independent or assertive. He smiled slightly as he said that, like it was an unfortunate but predictable outcome. Predictable. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. He explained that empathy can be leveraged in subtle ways. If someone values understanding, they often give second chances. If someone prioritizes harmony, they avoid escalation. He said he appreciates those traits. Appreciates. He described it like preference, not manipulation. I asked if the women he dated knew this was part of his motivation. He shrugged. He said he never lied about volunteering. He just did not articulate the strategic component. Strategic component. The phrase felt cold in the warm cafe air. He leaned forward slightly and said I seemed genuinely compassionate. He said that is rare and valuable. Valuable. The way he said it made me feel assessed instead of admired. I asked what would happen if I disagreed with him strongly about something. He paused briefly before saying disagreements are manageable when one person remains grounded. Grounded, the word again, but now it sounded like containment. He said conflict drains him. He prefers environments where his partner diffuses tension instead of escalating it. He described it as emotional intelligence. But emotional intelligence without boundaries becomes surrender. When the check came, he left a $5 tip on the $9 bill and said generosity reflects character. The irony felt sharp. Outside, the street was quiet. Afternoon light spilling across sidewalks. He walked beside me and said he feels drawn to women who give freely because it signals long-term potential. He asked if I would like to volunteer together next weekend. Volunteer together. I realized then that he was not inviting me to share values. He was inviting me to reinforce his filter. Later that evening, he sent a message saying he admires how I interacted with families at the event. He said I handled emotional conversations gently. He added that those qualities create stable partnerships. Stable partnerships. I read the message slowly, noticing how every compliment carried evaluation underneath. The next morning, he followed up asking if I believe empathy is sometimes mistaken for weakness. I did not respond. What unsettled me most was not that he volunteers. It was that he engineered his environment to attract a specific type of woman he believed would accommodate him. He saw kindness as a resource, compassion as leverage. The church parking lot will fill again next Saturday with volunteers lifting boxes and handing out groceries. People will show up because they care. But now know that sometimes someone standing beside you in a neon vest is not there to help. They are there to select. I knew the night was going to be strange when he asked me what my key strengths were before the appetizers arrived. Not what I like to do for fun. Not what kind of music I listen to. Key strengths. Kevin picked the restaurant. It was one of those upscale places downtown where the lighting is so dim you feel like you are in a private booth even when you are not. Dark wood panels, leather seats, soft jazz playing low in the background. The kind of place where the servers introduce themselves like they are part of a curated experience. I almost felt underdressed walking in, even though I was not. He was already seated when I arrived, posture straight, hands folded on the table. He stood when he saw me and shook my hand firmly instead of hugging me. That detail stayed with me later. It felt less like greeting a date and more like closing a deal. We ordered drinks, 2 old fashions at $18 each. He nodded approvingly at my choice and said decisive people tend to do well long term. I laughed because I thought he was joking. He did not laugh back. He simply took a sip and watched me over the rim of his glass. For the first 10 minutes, things felt mostly normal. He asked about where I live, what I do for work, whether I see myself staying in this city long term. I told him I work in marketing and that I like flexibility in my future. He tilted his head slightly at the word flexibility. Then he reached down beside his chair and pulled out a black leather notebook. Not small, not casual, a full-size notebook. He placed it on the table carefully, parallel to the edge, and clicked the pen open. I thought maybe he was taking notes for something work-related later, but then he looked at me and said, I believe in structured growth within relationships. I blinked. He continued calmly, explaining that he thinks most couples fail because they avoid measurable feedback. Without evaluation, people become complacent. He said it like he was describing a fitness routine. I stared at the notebook. He said he implements quarterly relationship reviews. Every 3 months, both partners sit down and assess performance across key areas. Attraction consistency, communication efficiency, conflict resolution, long-term goal alignment, emotional stability. He used the word performance without irony. I laughed again, softer this time, hoping it was some kind of elaborate joke. It was not. He opened the notebook and turned it toward me slightly. I could see columns drawn neatly in ink, category headers, number scales from 1 to 10, note sections labeled strengths and areas for improvement. Areas for improvement. The server arrived to take our food order. We chose steaks and sides. The total, I noticed on the menu, would likely land around $124 before tip. Kevin ordered without hesitation, confident and precise. After the server left, he turned his attention fully back to me. So, he said, what would you identify as your top 3 strengths as a partner? I felt heat rise to my face. It felt like a job interview question. I hesitated. He waited patiently, pen hovering just above the page. The silence stretched longer than comfortable. Finally, I said loyalty, humor, and adaptability. He wrote them down carefully, then he asked for examples. Examples. I explained a situation from my last relationship where I supported someone through a difficult period. He nodded and scribbled notes. He did not interrupt. He did not comment emotionally. He simply documented. He told me he applies the same evaluation structure to himself. He schedules reflection sessions. He believes self-optimization strengthens intimacy. Self-optimization. I asked what happens if someone scores low in a category. He responded calmly that low scores are not failures. They are opportunities for corrective action. Corrective action plans are developed collaboratively. Corrective action plans. The jazz music in the background suddenly felt louder. I could hear the clink of glasses from another table. It all felt strangely surreal, like I had stepped into a seminar instead of a date. He described his last relationship. He said it ended because his former partner resisted structured feedback. She interpreted quarterly reviews as criticism rather than growth opportunities. He shook his head slightly, like he was disappointed in her lack of vision. Lack of vision. He asked how I handle criticism. I said it depends on tone and intention. He wrote that down too. Then he circled something lightly beside it. I could not see the number. When the food arrived, he continued the conversation as if nothing unusual was happening. He asked about my 5-year plan. I said I prefer leaving room for change. He frowned slightly at that. He said flexibility without direction can lead to misalignment. Misalignment. He explained that during quarterly reviews, both parties assess whether they are still aligned with shared objectives. If divergence appears, recalibration is necessary. Recalibration. He said like adjusting a compass. I tried to imagine sitting across from him 3 months from now while he assigned me a number for emotional resilience. The thought made my stomach tighten. He asked if I would be comfortable receiving improvement notes. I asked what kind of notes. He said if I interrupt frequently, avoid difficult conversations, or display inconsistent affection, it would be documented and addressed. Documented. He spoke about intimacy like it was a performance metric. When the check arrived, it totaled $126. He paid immediately and added a $24 tip without calculating for long. Then, while the server processed the payment, he flipped to a new page and wrote date 1 preliminary assessment at the top. Preliminary assessment. He read aloud from his notes. Strong initial chemistry. Good conversational flow. Moderate adaptability. High ambition potential but needs clearer long-term vision. Needs clearer long-term vision. I stared at him. He looked genuinely proud of the structure. Outside, the night air felt colder than when I arrived. He walked beside me calmly and said he believes accountability from the beginning prevents resentment later. He asked if I would be open to implementing quarterly reviews if we continue seeing each other. Implementing quarterly reviews. Later that night, he emailed me a digital template. Subject line, Relationship Alignment Framework. It included rating categories, goal-setting timelines, and even contingency planning if satisfaction scores fall below 7. Contingency planning. I read the document slowly in my bedroom, noticing sections I had missed. There was a box for bonus qualities exceeding expectations, a space for documenting recurring weaknesses, a reminder to schedule the next review immediately after each session. It felt less like romance and more like performance management. The next morning, he followed up asking what day works best for structured reflection conversations in general. He said Sundays are optimal for objective assessment because emotions from the week have settled. Objective assessment. What unsettled me most was not that he valued communication. That part is healthy. It was that he removed unpredictability entirely. There was no room for spontaneous joy, no room for messy growth. Everything required measurement. I imagined disagreeing with him about something small and watching him open that notebook. I imagined arguing and knowing a number would follow. I did not reply to his message. I blocked his email. The steakhouse still glows softly at night, couples leaning across dark tables sharing wine and laughter. From the outside, it looks intimate. But for me, it will always be the place where someone tried to turn connection into quarterly reports.